Welcome back to another episode of Men on Trek. Beaming in from parts unknown to talk about what we like about Star Trek and how it holds up over time and how the writing is, even after all these years, just fantastic and superior to a lot of what you see today.
Season 1, Episode 3.
Yeah, Men on Trek. Season 1, Episode 3. The Ultimate Computer is the subject of today's conversation. Season 2, Episode 24, originally aired March 8th, 1968. Back with our usual crew, Admiral James T. Palpatine. Especially relevant today, Captain Mark Daystrom.
I am great, but you are not great.
We'll see how great you are. You
are great. I am great.
And myself, Admiral Looks Good in Red Keith, and we have Instant Audio Arthur making everything sound good. So, gentlemen, let's get.
He's better than the Ensign. He should at least be a lieutenant.
He'll get promoted. He'll get promoted soon.
By the end of the podcast,
if he lives.
Mm-hmm. What color shirt do you have on?
So, as always, if you're liking what you're hearing, then please hit like and subscribe, and let us know how you feel about it. And we appreciate your feedback. But let's dive in, gentlemen. The Ultimate Computer. Dr. Miles Daystrom and Captain Dunsel.
I think watching it again, I had some real different thoughts about what Daystrom was doing and what the computer was doing, and I know that we're going to get into it. But since we've started doing these podcasts, I've probably been taking a closer look analytically at the structure, and then within that structure starting to see some plot elements that I had overlooked or maybe made assumptions with. And this episode, at first, and I think I was chatting with you guys before we started recording today. You know, I was doing an evaluation, you know, because we were focusing on top 10, top 15. And I was like, I don't know, maybe this is going to slide out of that top 10 spot, because the way that I thought of it in the past and the way that I'm thinking of it now had changed. But luckily, after talking to you two for a little while, I was able to put it back in there, because I was concerned that this was written in a way that, and we talk about this, the writers are phenomenal for these shows that we really love. I mean, we agree on that, the directing, the acting, all the stuff that's really good, and why we want to talk about it, because it's positive. We're not here to rip things down and point out how terrible things are. But I started to question a little bit, did the writers write this story in a way that it was going to devalue Kirk as a captain? Was he becoming this throwaway person? Was this a byproduct of what it is that they were trying to write, which is this idea that machines can take humans' jobs and do them better? Because you never write your own bad review. And so were the writers, as a byproduct, making starship captains sort of Dunsels? And as we see through the episode, there's sort of it doesn't turn out that way. But I was trying to be open while I was watching it and saying, you know, maybe they didn't intend that. Maybe they were focusing on something different. But I had to think about it a lot.
Well, as we look at the episode, I think it's reinforcing how important the captain is, and that he's not easily replaceable. It starts out as an episode to replace by mechanization, but it becomes that the captain is not that easily replaceable. The decisions the computer makes as we go through the story seem to be right and correct. But removing yourself and your personal feelings from the job to make the right decision is a problem. The computer cannot do that, or did not do that. So, Admiral Redshirt, Keith, you want to go ahead and start the synopsis of it, and we can step through the episode.
What we have is a typical 4-act format. Back in the old days, more or less broken by the commercial breaks. Act 1, the Enterprise is called to a starbase on what we would call a top secret order. They've been ordered to make all speed to a starbase, and they have no idea why. And of course, they find out there are 4 other starships there, which is unusual in itself. And first time we see Commodore Wesley, I believe. I think it's the first time he's shown. And Kirk is informed that his computer is to be the test bed for the M5 computer, and the computer and Dr. Daystrom are beamed aboard. And that sets the premise for, as you said, that sets the premise for a study in technology versus human beings.
So what we have as we go through the first part of the episode, as you said, the Enterprise is called to the space station. And Kirk doesn't know why. They get to the space station, they're hailed, and he proceeds to ask the question, and he's told them the answer to the question is already beaming onto your ship, which ends up being Commodore Wesley. And as Kirk goes down, him and Spock go down to the transporter room. Commodore Wesley is stepping off the platform.
It's actually Daystrom coming over.
No, it's Wesley.
It is Wesley? Okay,
So
I'm getting ahead of myself.
So Kirk automatically dismissed the ensign controlling the transporter pad so that they can have a clean room to discuss, why am I here? What's going on? Because I've been told that my crew is being transported over to the spaceport.
He's not happy. Frame 1. He's sitting
Right.
on the bridge, and he goes, What is happening here? I'm ordered to come here out of the blue, and my crew is going to be taken off the ship. And they said, well, your answers are down there. Then he heads downstairs.
And not only that, something I hadn't paid attention to previously. Not only is the crew removed to the starbase, they are in confinement. This thing is so secret.
Yes.
This thing is so secret that anybody involved is confined until the test is done. And that opening scene kind of struck me as pretty accurate military procedure. The ship is ordered to an undisclosed location. The crew is removed. Only essential personnel are involved. They're maintaining a high level of secrecy.
So Commodore Wesley tells Kirk that we're about to engage in war games to prove the M5 system. Now, it's a computer.
In addition to other tests, yeah.
Well, the tests are for the M5. Nothing else is going on but M5.
Right.
And that he's going to be left with a minimal crew of 20 men. And Kirk goes, I can't operate a starship with 20 guys. And Commodore Wesley tells him the M5 can.
Right.
Yes.
Oh, what about my people? They're non-essential
Yes.
personnel. So Kirk goes on to say, what security does M5 need? It doesn't need any security.
Right.
So we're facing a situation where a ship of 400 people have now been pared down to 20, and the M5 will have total control over the ship, and that sets the premise for the episode.
And in truth, that 20 is theoretically only needed in case something goes wrong on a test. It's not in normal operation based on the premise. They're not even needed.
Right. And most of the, like you said, it's not that if something goes wrong, that probably half of those personnel are there to evaluate the performance.
True.
Yeah.
Well,
Because they state later on that you don't need anybody.
Right.
well, you still need somebody to beam down. I mean, the ship can take so many surveys, but during the episode, M5 does give suggestions for for crew members to beam down. So that there has to be somebody who physically goes on the planet, because you don't have a probe that's going to go down there and do it.
Yeah, you're probably right, because we're getting ahead of ourselves, but when they go to a planet, there is a roster of people available to go down there, and that's probably makes up a large part of that 20 that stayed on. We know of the handful: Scotty, Kirk, Spock, one of Scotty's boys. So this may be 5 or 6 that we know about: Nahura, Chekhov, and Sulu. So the rest is probably made up of landing party type personnel.
Or department heads who have to evaluate specific performances.
Right.
So that's where we are in the episode. Admiral Wesley tells Kirk what the premise is: war games and trials for M5. And we go from there to them going to the engineering to meet Daystrom.
Yes.
It's actually Daystrom, but
Daystrom.
to go to engineering to meet Daystrom, and that sets up the next part of it. But when we look at it, we're thinking of a ship of 400 only needing 20 people, and Kirk makes the point: I can't run a starship with 20 individuals, but M5 can.
Yes. Man versus machine. Right at the beginning when Wesley's explaining all this to Kirk's reaction, it's not so much there's certain things he says, but it's the visuals you get, the reaction and the tone of the whole scene. It's immediately like, what do you mean? What do you mean we're non-essential? I mean, when he says they're non-essential, he's like, my crew is very essential. This immediately is not sitting well with Kirk, and it comes across very well in the way it's presented. Sight unseen. He doesn't even know anything about it yet. He just doesn't like the idea of it. It doesn't sit well with him.
I think there's also a cliche here that, what we're saying is man versus machine, but as the story unfolds, it's really man against a man machine.
Yes.
It's not.
Yeah, it is.
It's not a machine
type device.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's not a true machine.
Right.
Well,
it's a prelude to Skynet.
Yeah, that's a little ways down the road, but yeah. It's just the thought of, in this initial scene, it's just the thought of, and people experience this in real life. Technology advances, and you're like, I might be out of a job.
So the war games consist of the M5 trials, as Admiral Wesley calls
Commodore.
it. Commodore, thank you. Calls it maneuvering, planetary evaluation, and the mock war games. That's the M5 trial. So throughout the episode, M5 is going to do these 3 events for a shakedown to see if it's capable of running a Constitution class starship.
What an interesting premise, though. I mean, it's amazing that even Starfleet, and maybe they hint on it a little bit where they say later on that McCoy says that Starfleet bought it and Daystrom had to make it work, because
yes.
why would you go into a project where you're going to take and basically dismantle 90% of your Starfleet and put computers in place? It's an interesting concept.
It's the altruistic idea that generally doesn't hold water. This is a dangerous job. We send people out into deep space and we lose them. We've talked about it before over the course of the show. How many people die? Entire crews are lost. Entire ships are lost.
Well, it's not like it's the British Navy and they were conscripting guys off of,
true,
bringing Romulans on board the staff. There's a line of people waiting to get on board.
But it's the argument that's always made that if you can, I call it the altruistic idea, because the idea is that if you can automate certain things and spare people from doing those jobs because they're dangerous, because they're difficult or what have you, that it's somehow better for humanity. But is that necessarily the case?
As we said in Doomsday and the episode before that,
Balance of Terror,
these are the best of the best. If I can redirect the best of the best to do something other than what's dangerous, how much greater will society progress? Now, we're going far afield. I don't think the writers thought that deeply about it. But when you look at mechanization, generally you're replacing the low end. You no longer have auto workers lifting up body parts and putting it on a car. You're not replacing the top echelon.
That's true.
You're replacing the grunt. And 5 is a different ball game. They're talking about replacing a starship captain. How much more could Kirk do if that was not his job?
Yeah, I think that's a very progressive way of looking at it. The other way is,
I'm not
which
progressive.
just
That's a slap. I'm gonna
which
hit you.
just dawned on me was, would it be practical to replace your starship captains with these computers, or could you make more starships, and you could have more of them deployed? So in other words, there's a finite number of starship captains that are capable of running. It's like, I learned this in business school and MBA. They said, how many people can run a Fortune 500 company? They said there's about 100 people.
And that, excuse me for cutting, but
Yeah.
that's what we're talking about. The starship captain is that Fortune, or actually beyond that, Fortune 500 level guy.
Right. Well, what I'm proposing is that there's 100 starship captains for 500 ships. So
Okay,
you would
I
have
get you.
400
I get you.
M5s that could flesh it out. So if I'm Commodore Wesley and I go into battle, I've got I've got
a bigger fleet.
Yes.
Because I can't find people
Right.
qualified enough to
Right.
do the job.
Right.
I can slide M5 in.
Right.
And he can make the criteria.
Right.
But M5 doesn't have to go through all the tests
Right.
that's required to be a starship captain.
That's the one thing they probably don't touch on in the episode, but it's a logical conclusion. It correlates to what's happening today. Our military is trying to pair F-35 fighter planes and the elite pilot in that plane with drone backup. So a pilot a live pilot in an aircraft is controlling 10, 15 drones. Force multiplication is what you're talking about.
Right.
And also from a practical standpoint, theoretically, if it's an M5 starship, the ship can be smaller. The ship can be made more cheaply because it doesn't have to hold 400 people, and all these different things can happen. You can pare it down to its essential equipment.
That's true. When we look in the episode, we'll get to it, but M5 starts to shut off unnecessary things.
Unnecessary things.
So, but in the transporter room, the conversation was, Kirk asked the question, what am I supposed to do, to Admiral Wesley? And Wesley says, you have a great job, Jim. Sit back and let the computer run the ship.
Enjoy the ride.
Well, that's not why I'm there. That's not why I became a captain.
But I think that's a perfect sort of contrast between a Commodore who is probably done with that cowboy part of his career, and to him it doesn't sound so bad, to a Kirk whose first 5-year mission, and it's like, you're going to take my ship away from me, and I haven't even finished my first mission.
I just got here.
I'm kicking and screaming, but Commodore Wesley was like, "Hey, you got a great job, man. Just sit back and enjoy the ride. That's all I'm going to do. Collect my pension, and I'm done."
Then Kirk fleshes that thought out when he talks to Daystrom later on. But
well, Kirk says, a key thing that Kirk says to him, he says, there's some things men need to do
that's
to be men.
That's the conversation he has with Daystrom.
Yes.
In the second part.
No, that's the beginning. That's when he first talks to him.
Okay, but that's not in the transporter room. That's when they shift, because it goes from there to them leaving space dock.
Goes down to engineering.
The M5 is installed.
Mm-hmm.
All the crew's off, and they've left space dock, and then they move down to engineering, where Kirk goes to talk to Daystrom, and then that conversation ensues.
Right.
So the conversation with Wesley is done. Wesley's gone, and Kirk's shaking his head because he tells McCoy, they go down to the engineering room, and he goes, they tell me it's a great honor.
So I'm honored.
Yeah, so I'm honored. But this is my ship. I haven't done my time in the barrel yet. I want my...
I'm not feeling honored.
Right, I'm not feeling honored.
I'm feeling pushed aside. I thought the conversation between Kirk and McCoy after Kirk talks to Daystrom kind of really encapsulated, I think, one of the primary thoughts they were going after. McCoy in this one kind of provides a lot of the exposition that moves the story forward. In the hallway talking to Kirk, and to Kirk's credit, you find out he's not an egomaniac. He's not an arrogant person, because he's objective enough to question, am I wrong about this? Should I be happy about this? Is this a good thing?
That's true, but that happens after the conversation
After
with
the conversation with Daystrom.
So
yeah.
let's go. We've got the M5 on the ship. They've left Starport or Starbase, and now he's going down to Daystrom.
And minute one starts with problems.
Yes.
Because Daystrom's like, hi, hello. Spock says a great honor. And then he's, well, I'm ready to turn this on, and your chief engineer won't give me the power. So just so already it's just him walking through the door with this machine. And once again, it goes back to that, our Scotty theory that it's really Scotty's ship and he doesn't like when people mess with it. And here we go. Now we're going to mess with his ship. And he basically, it takes a direct order from Kirk.
Yeah, he's like, you're going to have to make me do this.
Yep.
I'm not doing it.
And he's like, okay, I'll turn it on.
You know what that reminded me of? That reminded me of the Calvin Star Trek, where in not the Wrath of Khan remake,
Into Darkness.
Into Darkness, where they bring the torpedoes on. And Scotty's like, not on my ship.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
I don't
Absolutely.
know what type of energy these torpedoes are. I don't know nothing about them. You're not being I'm not going to let you just bring these onto my ship. I'm not signing off on it. That's just what popped in my mind.
Yeah.
The writing from Into Darkness, they use that personality trait of Scotty found in the old episodes.
Right.
Which is, as you stated, this is not the captain's ship.
Oh, it's Scotty's ship.
This is my ship.
Yeah.
I should.
It's just he's the current captain is using it and usually
Breaking
wrecking
it.
Yeah, breaking it. So then they get it. It starts to come on, and then we talked a little bit about this, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about it. It seems like you see it down one of the warp nacelles. I think that's what you're looking at. When you see the engine component, and there's some fluctuation. And Bones says, "Is it supposed to do that?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "No, it's fine." And
Power fluctuations.
Yeah, Spock's like, "Can I assist you?" He's like, "No, I got it." And I had started to talk a little bit about, did that damage M5? Was that power surge something that maybe started some of these issues? But you guys were pretty confident that you didn't think it had anything to do with it.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
No, the damage was already done in the creating of M5 and how it was created.
Yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there. But yeah,
He was made broke.
well, there's a definite contradiction there.
Well, men are broke.
Yeah,
Right.
people are imperfect.
And when you put an imperfect mind into a super body, you're going to get an imperfect device.
Well, imperfect people can't make a perfect thing.
That's what I'm getting at. Well, we'll see as we get through the story or the conversations between Daystrom, Spock, McCoy, and James T.
Right.
My I initially, down in engineering introductions, Daystrom immediately is somewhat aloof. There's an arrogance about him. He's kind of coming off like, my creation's going to put you guys out of a job, and you should be happy about that.
It's interesting in the casting of Daystrom. He's huge.
Yeah,
he looks like
7 foot guy.
He looks like he's 7 feet tall, and he's like 10% body fat. And I'm expecting. Well, and once again, I was expecting a little nerdy guy
this is Star Trek.
That's
This
right.
is Star Trek. This is a tall black man. in the 20th century, he would have been playing basketball. But he's a super scientist. But before they get to Daystrom, there's a conversation between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. And McCoy makes a statement, "I don't like it, Jim. The vessel this size can't be run by a computer." And Spock replies, "They're trying to prove M5 can run a vessel better than men."
Right.
That's the whole purpose of M5.
Right.
Can it do what we paid for it to do? And the purpose is to run a vessel, ergo without people. So
Wow. Still a strange military contract. Can you imagine nowadays we're gonna invent a computer that can run an aircraft carrier?
Oh, they probably do it.
You think so?
Oh yeah, there's projects. I mean,
You're still going to need people. You still need maintenance.
The current vent in our own military right now is to create vehicles, surface vehicles and seagoing vehicles that can do either or. They can run automated or they can be run by people. That they're moving in a direction where men will work alongside automated equipment to reduce the number of people needed to do a job, but two, to avoid some of the dangers. Modern drones, everything coming down the pipe in terms of aircraft and ships are required in the current draft to have a drone feature. So that's something they're doing.
The difference is it's still getting its directions from humans.
Not in all cases.
For airplanes, fly-by-wire systems, you input and the plane makes the decision what needs to be done according to the input you put in it. I don't think the writers really thought the M5, it was a good thought. It's the first time we've seen it. Every sci-fi show afterwards, because this is 1968,
right,
have used this venue.
A lot of premises come out of this episode if you think about it.
A lot of premises, science fiction, period.
Yes.
Comes out of what was done
right
from a Star Trek episode. And this is the first time we've seen it in science fiction at all, that a vessel of this kind has been turned over to a computer or a vessel, period.
There's probably some older written fiction that covers it, but
the first time we've seen it on a
TV format
or movie format.
Yes.
It's interesting, though, if you run that concept a little bit further. So there must have been a social evolution, which is, I think, an assumption when you talk about a program or a movie like Star Trek, which is about the future, that humanity, the better parts of it, those better angels of our natures have become dominant, because what utility is there in a ship that is sunk by an enemy that no one dies on? So in other words, the catalyst for a lot of the great conflicts that I don't know if great's the right word for it, maybe terrible conflicts that we've seen. Is
large scale conflicts?
Yeah, they sunk the Lusitania, or they bombed Pearl Harbor, and it wasn't so much that it was that you bombed Pearl Harbor because they bombed Pearl Harbor, it was that they killed all those soldiers that were there. So if you don't have any soldiers on a starship, you don't have any crew, and somebody takes out that starship, what's the Federation's response to that? It's like, whoops, we lost a ship, we'll replace it, no harm, no foul.
No, I don't think that's true. You'd still lost equipment, and it's still going to you're still going to have to give a response for the equipment you lost. You didn't lose people, but you can't let the loss stand. If the loss was intended, not by accident, and another country destroyed a ship, even though the ship is unpopulated, you still have to respond to the attack.
Well,
recent events have not borne that out.
One of the most powerful things that we have, and we recently talked about that in the last episode, was the Doomsday Machine.
Yes.
Think about Decker's response to losing his crew. You know, do you remember when Kirk says to him?
Don't you think I know that?
That's a emotional response to the loss of life and his crew. If that's not there, then what's Starfleet about then?
I still think you have to deal with the encroach of a foreign body, even though the ship is not populated, because if the ship is patrolling a territory and a foreign body comes in and takes it out,
right?
Something still has to be done.
But I'm saying
the response will be different, though.
Well, you're not losing human life,
right?
But you still lost equipment.
You won't,
and had encroachment into your territory.
As Jim was alluding to, you probably won't go to war over the loss of equipment,
right?
Unless it's just a continual attack. You won't respond the same way.
Okay. Yeah. Well, this is our
adding to. Right.
Right.
It's just me saying what an interesting concept for Starfleet to engage in. I think they're pandering to Daystrom's fading genius. In other words, somebody probably said, give him the contract because he hasn't done anything in the past 30 years, but he did duotronics. We owe him a lot. I just don't see senior Starfleet command or any sort of government body saying this is a good idea. We're going to remove some of our best people from first contact and establishing and exploring in that. I just feel personally that somebody said, you know what, Daystrom's got this idea, and they're like, okay, go ahead and let him try it.
Go ahead.
I almost view it from the other side. I think because Daystrom was the authority on the technology, he sold them on the idea. He said, I can give you a system that will go out and do 99% of what your human beings are doing now, and it's safer and it's more efficient and it'll happen faster. He sold someone on the idea enough to do a proof of concept. And he had the reputation behind him where, maybe to your point, they said, well, this is Daystrom. We have to consider it.
But it's interesting, though, if you look at the three individuals that commented directly on that idea. One was McCoy, who from the very beginning didn't like it.
Yeah,
didn't like it. Thought it was morally wrong. It was not. Just considering the idea there was inherent danger. He wasn't for it. Kirk, and you can talk about what Daystrom actually says to him. Well, you're going to miss the power and the ceremony of being a starship captain? Yeah, I would. Yeah, because I worked real hard to get to this point, and I like it when 400 Mo stand up when I walk through the corridors. I like that.
There's only so many people that can do this.
Right.
Before we get to that,
hold on, I got to get my last one.
All right.
The third one is Spock. So you've got three different points of view here. You've got McCoy's all emotional. You've got Kirk, who it's hitting him probably the most personal because it is about taking away his power and his prestige. But then you have Spock, who says, no, it's okay. I like working with computers, but I don't want to be servants to them. So anyways, and then I'll just leave it at that. There was some knucklehead at Starfleet that said this is a good idea and we should try it.
So episode 11 of the first season, which is a Corbomite maneuver, you have the First Federation that has a huge starship ran by one guy.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And that means the whole ship has got to be computer run.
The
Bellic.
What was the name of the ship? The Blacerius?
Blacerius or something
Blacerius,
like that, yeah.
So the whole ship is ran by the computer, but one guy's on the ship. Computer runs everything, but the whole ship, but one guy in command. And this is a little bit of a twist. Starfleet could potentially go to that type of format.
Right. You're right.
So as we look at the conversation between Daystrom and Kirk and Spock within the engineering, and Daystrom goes negative automatically because when Kirk gives the okay for Scotty to give power to the unit, and the unit seems to be acting quirky.
Right.
And Spock chimes in, "Can I help you?" And they say, No, I've got it under control. So Kirk and Daystrom have the conversation. Well, McCoy chimes in about the unit taking over the ship. And the first thing Daystrom asks is, "Who's this guy?" And Kirk goes, "This is the chief medical officer, or chief surgeon." And he goes, "Well,
why is he here?
Yeah,
does
he have clearance? Who's this guy? Does he have clearance to be here? Because this is a top secret program." And Kirk tells him, "Yeah, he has clearance throughout the whole entire ship. He's our chief surgeon." So Daystrom goes negative about the loss of prestige and ceremony that you were bringing up, which is like a jab at Kirk.
Right.
It's a direct jab at James T, because he thinks Kirk's motivation is about the prestige and the ceremony, which I don't think it is.
His ego. He's assuming Kirk is just that guy. That he's just this egotistical.
I don't think
fleet guy.
Right. I don't think he is. It's good to have, but I don't think that's Kirk's motivation for being a starship captain. I don't think he got into this job or that job for people to be bowing and scraping and for him to get accolades.
Not at all. They bring that out pretty well.
So when Kirk gets into it and he starts self-reflection with McCoy.
Right.
But the conversation, Kirk makes a statement about what a man needs. And most men derive who they are from what they do. What they do is such importance to the human male, and let me say in Western society. How can I put this? It is the thing that we put forth and value in our own lives.
It's our purpose.
It's our purpose.
It's what defines.
And if you strip from me my purpose, what am I?
You don't know. I mean, your identity's stripped away.
Well, let's rock with that. When your identity's stripped away, once again, what are you? Who are you? It's an existential crisis for Kirk. And how many other captains will fall into this mix if M5 gets the okay?
All of them, apparently.
Well, maybe not as Jim said. Maybe they're just going to expand the fleet.
They don't.
But
it's a logical argument, but they don't present it that way in the episode. In the episode, it looks like it's the end of human captains.
I think also, when you talk about did Kirk do it because of did Kirk become a captain because of the prestige in the ceremony? No, I don't believe that was his motivation to become a captain. But I believe that once you become a captain, that is something that they expect.
Well, yeah.
It's like a parking spot. It's like a company credit card. It's like, and which a lot of these perks don't exist anymore. But I'm just saying,
I wouldn't say so much like an expected perk, but when you hit that level, as we've talked about, there's only a few people that achieve this, especially in the context of Star Trek. A starship captain is a very special individual. And
which is interesting because we've just talked about this. We're probably going within Men on Trek. We're going to have a subset of a podcast specifically about starship captains who lose it.
Yeah.
Just because you get it doesn't mean you get to keep it,
or you can maintain it,
or you maintain it, or you stay with the prime directive, or you stay with being on the side of Starfleet. There's quite a bit of episodes for the total number of episodes of the original Star Trek series that are dedicated towards starship captains who lose it. There's one starship captain who's in an insane asylum.
Right.
And
there's also episodes dealing with people who couldn't make the cut.
Right.
There's several episodes who don't make the grade.
Right.
Who are not capable of holding that command. So you've jumped through every hoop Starfleet has put before you. Mm-hmm. You've made it to the top of multiple planets list to become a starship captain, and there's no perks involved in this.
Not so much.
I'm being treated just like an ensign.
Not just.
It's expected a certain manner of respect.
That's more
a certain manner of prestige.
You earn, but it's earned
because you are a starship captain, and you see it flow through the writing in various episodes. He's a starship captain. He's not your average guy. I was just watching Bread and Circuses, and in that episode, it's pushed forth even more than M5. It elevates the status of what a captain is. I just use that as an example. So Kirk is having a conversation with Daystrom. The conversation goes negative, and Daystrom gets into the privilege and prestige. And Daystrom says the computer can do the job without all that. And Kirk says, you have to prove that to me.
Yes.
And Daystrom jabs back right before Kirk leaves, and that's why we're here.
Right,
To prove to you that M5 can do your job with all the butt kissing that goes along with you being a captain.
I'm wondering too, and that also brought up something, and I was thinking about when seeing this episode after doing these podcasts. I'm trying to understand the way the writers wrote this, but I guess good writers can tell a story, and that creates all these different ideas that you might have of what it is that they're trying to do and say. So not that Starfleet would ever ask for the outcome, okay, that they get from this episode. But maybe there is a component to this that they were thinking, well, give Daystrom his shot at this. And two things is, one is we're really not going to do it. And number two is this could probably prove to Daystrom that the computer can't do it.
That's an interesting.
And that's the point, I think, because the writers are not going to diminish their star, right?
Yeah.
Kirk's the star.
Right.
They're using the episode in M5 to bolster what a captain is. So they write the scenario of a computer that can potentially do the job, but as we see, it can't. And that makes a starship captain even more what?
Valuable.
And I think that I only really see one example of that in this episode, and it doesn't come from Kirk. In other words, I don't see Kirk proving throughout the episode that he has more value to the situation than M5 does, except for the obvious things, which are mistakes. The real value of the starship captain is revealed when Commodore Wesley, at the end of the episode, makes a purely command decision that there would be no way that the M5 would come up with that decision.
Yes.
Podcast listeners, I'm clapping right now for Jim's comment because it's so true. You would think Kirk would be the one to show you, but truly the value of the starship captain is shown by Wesley making a call that could have been detrimental, but that's way down the list.
Yeah, but then too, that is Kirk's moment because it's that intrinsic knowledge. Kirk is a trust, and his intrinsic knowledge he has of the other man that makes the difference. But I think in where we are now in the story, which is still fairly early, to me, a central part of the story or the theme, like Jimmy trying to lock down, where were they going for?
Right.
The conversation that McCoy and Kirk have when they leave engineering, to me, is that central. What McCoy delivers there to me is that central undertone of this episode. McCoy kind of gives them a very solid speech about nobody wants to lose their job to advances in technology and automation, but it happens. And McCoy even goes so far as to say, and we think it's all good until it's us. And, there's a saying, it depends on whose ox is being gored.
Right.
And Kirk is being introspective, which really is a feather in Kirk's cap. He's not being arrogant. He's not assuming. He's not railing against this thing, but he's questioning it. So he asked his friend. He said, "Am I off here? Am I wrong?"
Right. That takes place right after they leave Daystrom.
Right.
And
exactly.
Kirk is thinking about it. He goes, and McCoy says, "This is wrong." And Kirk is like, "I feel that this is wrong, but there's something, a red alert is happening in the back of my gut.
His gut's telling him it's wrong, but he doesn't have a intellectual reason.
He doesn't have any way
to say it's wrong,
to verify or prove it." That's right.
But what I think McCoy is delivering is the underlying theme of the episode is that people fear the loss of livelihood or the loss of what they know to be normal to the advance of technology or to changes in society. And I think that's what they were getting across. And then picking up on what Mark said, carrying forward from that, they lay that premise out like, we can be replaced as things change. Life changes. There's no way around it. and it only matters to you if it affects you, but it's coming, it changes. But then they go forward and they say, but the human element is always going to be necessary.
What's interesting in all those characters that were still remaining on the ship, although you could maybe have an argument for Sulu and Chekhov, I don't believe McCoy's job is on the line, even though he's called non-essential at some point. I know Spock's job is not on the line.
Well, that's not necessarily true. If you get to a totally automated ship, nobody needs a doctor. And M5 can run the scanners and faster and more efficiently than Spock even.
But it's interesting that no other characters seem to react the way that Kirk did. It seemed that they were specifically saying that this could eliminate a starship captain. They weren't saying, it wasn't McCoy walking around going, well, I guess I'll figure out what to do in retirement because there won't be anybody to take care of.
Well, he does at one point.
He makes that joke when Spock talks about, too bad we can't
replace a ship's doctor,
which they do in Voyager.
They're trading barbs.
With the computer.
They're trading barbs with each other.
But McCoy goes on to say that I would quit because there won't be anybody here.
Right.
I won't be needed, and because you replaced all the humans.
And I think Jim, they do deliver it, but it's more subtle. What I see in Chekhov and Sulu throughout the episode, and I'll throw Uhura in this also. They're kind of there, they're doing their thing, but fairly quickly they're kind of sitting there like, why am I here? I have nothing to do.
I'm unnecessary.
They become non-essential very quickly.
And they know it, and they're just kind of sitting there like, wow.
You could have left me at the Starbase and I could have been watching movies on the big screen or something.
I'm really not needed here. There's nothing for me to do.
But when Kirk and McCoy have that conversation where Captain Kirk says, I feel that something's wrong. A red alert is going on in the back of my head.
Right.
Something is wrong here. I can't put my finger on it. And McCoy goes through the existential of losing your job and all that. It's a moment for Kirk to evaluate the jab that he was stuck by Daystrom. And he starts to ask McCoy, am I that petty? Am I really here for the pomp and circumstance? Or do I just love being a starship captain? And that gets answered for us later on in the episode where Kirk and McCoy are in Kirk's quarters. But that's further down in the episode. So at this point, Daystrom has got the computer up and running, and they go to planetary maneuvers, which I guess would be
the first exercise is to go to the planet, scan the planet.
Don't forget
planetary maneuvers.
Don't forget the great line that McCoy leaves with that. That discussion with him and Kirk, because one of the things we're going to do throughout the podcast here, and this is just a little housekeeping. There's going to be very few things that we make sound bites out of. In other words, sayings, things that are there. And McCoy's line to Kirk comes close to it. I don't think it's going to make the cut. But he says to Kirk, he says, if you're going to ask that question, why don't you ask
James T.
Kirk? Right. He's a pretty honest guy.
Right.
And just to give you an idea of like what makes those, what are we talking about? Sound bites. Why? Audio Arthur, you want to give us the ones from
which ones?
Doomsday Machine.
Doomsday Machine?
Yeah.
Okay, we have this one.
Don't you think I know that? But not anymore.
Those are the two we have.
So when we're talking about making sound bites, we're talking about these iconic, at least for us, these things that you repeat. And in this episode, there's two sound bites coming up. Do we want to give a little teaser?
I think I know what one of them might be.
Let's do a teaser.
Go ahead.
We'll give a teaser.
Give us a teaser.
Right, this is the first one.
You are great. I am great.
Yeah, that's one.
That's the first one. You want the second one?
Yeah, the second one.
The second one.
We're invincible. Look what we've done. Your mighty starships.
Yeah, but that's not the one I was thinking of.
Oh, yeah?
The one I'm thinking of is where they're talking about they're coming up on the war games, and Kirk goes, but they're playing M5's game.
Right.
You know, they think they're playing a war game, but M5's got its own game. But that's just what
We got
put
room.
on in my
We can
mind.
throw it on
We got
there.
room.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's a great. If you had a McCoy's greatest hit, or you had a McCoy's
Yeah.
sound bite, that would it's up there. It's, because what you're used to is Jim. He's dead.
Right.
Or Jim,
Well,
I'm not a.
I'm not a doc. I'm not an
carpenter.
engineer.
I'm not an engineer.
great-
I'm a doctor.
The
But
great collection of all the things McCoy is not.
right. But in this one, he actually says that's a great line that he almost repeats later on, just a few scenes later about asking and trusting a guy named James D. Kirk.
Well, it gets into that human element. He's telling Jim to trust his instincts. He's telling him there's something that can't be quantified. He's telling him to trust his gut.
But M5's missions, or the three that are given, is maneuvers, then planetary approach,
Right.
then war games. Right after Kirk has his conversation with McCoy, the scene changes and they're back on the bridge, and Kirk turns off M5 because it's done with its maneuvers,
Right.
and the conversation starts between him and Daystrom of what M5 done and what the bridge crew could have done. Kirk
Right.
goes, well, Sulu and Chekhov could have just as easily done that. And Daystrom goes, but they didn't have to.
Right.
You got a computer now that can do it, but instead of having a human
And it's
have to do it.
It's interesting. It's establishing almost immediately that Kirk is barely remaining open to what's happening. It's very clear when he's shutting him off, and what he's saying to Daystrom is that if he had his choice, he would stop it right there.
Yes.
It's a little uncharacteristic for
Yes,
what
it
you
is.
think of what Kirk would be doing. It seems like he was more open and honest with McCoy about his vulnerabilities. He's very vulnerable now. And then you start to see that vulnerability in his interactions with Daystrom. And Daystrom tells him at one point, because in that same scene, Kirk says, well, I'll pick my own landing party. He's like, well, if you feel like you need the exercise, go ahead and do it. I mean, it's bordering on petty.
right before they get to that part where they have the conversation about the landing party, when he turns off M5 and Chekhov makes a comment that we're back on course, Daystrom goes, you get to a point where you shouldn't have to turn off M5. Let M5 do what it does or what it's supposed to do. Kirk makes the statement, according to what the information I've been given, I'll run this ship as I see fit.
So now this just brings up an interesting point. So we talk about, was M5 broken, or was he designed with flaws, and what made those things worse? So if you think about the actions of your M5 and your program with this idea that you can do great things and you have the potential to do great things, but they keep taking control away from you when you're doing
You're proving yourself.
minor things. It's like you could almost understand that M5 was starting to resent.
Yeah, you're not taking control from me.
Right.
I got this ship now.
Right. When I get the chance, I'm keeping this because you keep shutting it off from me. Now they weren't turning off M5. They were taking control from him.
That once again, a quiet clap, because I 100% agree.
Yes.
And I haven't thought about it that way. We're not dealing with a computer. We're dealing with something greater that shows up. We get the information and a reveal later on in the story.
M5 has an ego like a person.
M5 has a personality.
Yes.
Yes.
And the first actions that his first interactions with the starship captain is the captain saying, you can have my ship, I'm taking it back. You can have my ship, I'm taking it back. You can have my ship, I'm taking it back.
You're not letting me prove who
Nope.
I am.
Nope.
And I'm going to take control and prove who I am.
Right.
But so Daystrom and Kirk have that conversation. Once again, this is a conflict between Daystrom and Kirk, because Kirk goes, I'm going to run the ship like I
Right. He tells him.
like I want to.
He makes a
actually
declarative statement. He
So-
says,
So they start their planetary approach, which is a second test for M5. And Daystrom speaks up. You don't have any say in this. You've been told what you're going to do, and you're going to turn over control to M5
And let him do
and
it.
let it do what it's supposed to do. And that's when Kirk goes, well, I'll make my own recommendations for landing crew.
Right.
And Daystrom flippantly goes, do what you want to do.
Right.
If you need to exercise, go ahead.
Right.
But M5's going to make his.
And in that moment, the adversarial relationship, Daystrom is clearly as a biased against Kirk and probably Starfleet in general, which we find out, yes. And Kirk has just gotten completely annoyed with this thing. And like Jim said, he'd cut it off now and leave it off and just go back to the starbase if he could, but he has orders.
I think for Daystrom, Kirk becomes the symbol of what people have done with his work and what he does not want done with M5. And Kirk's first actions are to control it. It's almost unconsciously he's pushing Daystrom into that area where Daystrom does not trust what people are going to do with his work, and you can see it from the first interactions, and and as we'll see, it doesn't get any better.
But for Daystrom, it's not just his work. M5 is his child.
Right.
We don't know that yet.
Right.
Kirk doesn't know that yet. But
yeah, he has that level of feeling
Daystrom
and
has
commitment.
that thing that you're preventing my child from proving itself,
from developing.
And that comes up as it goes. So they get to the planet and they turn over M5, and as Kirk makes the standard, prepare for orbit, M5's already done it.
Right.
Right.
M5's entered into orbit. And, prepare scan M5, Spock scans, M5 scans, and then the request for bridge crew or landing party. And Kirk gives his request, his desires for the landing party, his recommendations. Let me use that word. His recommendations for those who are going to be part of the landing party. And then Daystrom uses the M5 tie-in, and M5 gives its request or its recommendation for the landing party. And there's a conflict. Two individuals Kirk chooses are left off, and one of the individuals is completely flipped with somebody else.
Planet geologist. Right.
So Daystrom goes, well, let's find out. Kirk gives his, and he goes, okay, what does M5 give? And Kirk makes the comment, well, it's a judgment of M5. And Spock speaks up.
Computers do not make judgments. They make logical decisions based on fact and data.
Fact and data.
That's what should happen.
The information it has. But we all know if you give the computer faulty information, you will give a faulty judgment.
Right.
But in this case, it doesn't. What is it? Planetologist Carstairs?
The geologist is what? The geologist is what?
Carstairs.
Astrophysicist, I think, is the one guy.
Yeah, they don't.
They agree on
they
that.
They agree on the astrophysicist.
Right. It's the geologist.
They only agree. M5 and Kirk agree on two positions.
Right. Spock and
the astrophysicist.
And it's the geologist. Kirk makes his statement. This is just a green guy. He's brand new.
Right. Kirk picks the department head, and M5 picks an ensign.
Right. And then Daystrom asked M5 why, and because this ensign had been on the planet before, when he was in the commercial industry. That's why M5 chose him, because he had planetary knowledge before, and that might be something in his file. But would you really expect the captain to remember all that?
Kirk didn't know it at all, and he wouldn't.
That's what I'm getting at. Do you really expect the captain, a human, to know everything in everybody's file down to that detail?
Well, but that's a point for the computer in that instance, and
I'm not taking it away.
Right.
That's information the computer would have.
Sure.
I don't see a problem with the captain asking for the computer to give its recommendations, and the captain pick from that. But that's not something you would expect a human to keep in mind.
It's interesting because you start to see that father-son relationship with the computer in this scene, and what I mean by that is that Daystrom is like, he says, well, let's see what M5 recommendation. In other words, my son's going to tell you why he made these decisions.
Right.
And his son comes forward with I think at this point, M5 sounds like a computer, and he sounds like he's trying to present this information in a way that it wouldn't provoke a negative response from someone. So the first thing he says when Daystrom says, you know, why did you make these choices? He says it in a certain way. And M5 says, science officer necessary to lead the scientific mission. So
Right.
he just didn't jump to the contentious person. In fact, he left it out. Daystrom had to ask him why you didn't include those two individuals. Okay, so you've got your son and you're proud of him, and he says, I picked the science officer because he can just do his job. The astrophysicist has done 29 planets that are similar to this, and geologist Carstales, or maybe I got the name wrong, he served on a merchant freighter and did a geological survey of the planet. I did a good job. And everybody, I think, would be fine with that. But then that's where Daystrom steps in and says, well, no, son, why don't you tell the bad man why you didn't pick him?
Right. The whole point is Daystrom says Daystrom won't let it go.
He won't let it go.
He could have just stopped there. But
stopped there.
Daystrom's going to take another jab at James T. and go, I think you're mad because you weren't picked. Well, why wasn't Dr. McCoy?
Let's
and
find out, son. Tell the bad man why he's not going on the trip. And what is M5 say? Could be another sound bite. Non-essential personnel. Non-essential personnel.
Now, I got a problem with that. You mean you're beaming down to a planet and you're not going to take at least some medical officer just in case? Just in case? I don't know.
I don't think we don't disagree, but I think my brain goes to, well, if the transporters are working, you probably beam them right into sick bay. But once again, you know, what if something happens to the ship? You're down there. What now? You're asking me? First of all, I'm not going anywhere without McCoy and his hypo. I want those stimulants. I want those.
So
sleepy.
if I'm going to a starship, I'm taking Scotty with me. But if I'm going on planet, I'm going to have my doctor.
That's right.
Take
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. Well, you take for granted probably everybody has some basic medical training, but you know who's got the magic bag, like Jim said.
Remember, he can regrow a kidney with a beam.
That's right. Now isn't this where now all of a sudden we get two approaching ships?
No.
No.
While this is taking place, M5 starts to shut off systems within the ship. I think it's during this.
He begins to turn off lights.
He begins, because as they're having the conversation, you know, deck 4 goes dark.
Well, Scotty is saying it like somebody's committing a capital crime. He's like,
how dare they?
Power is off on deck number 4.
How dare they?
Who's turning off the lights?
And then the music and the close up, and it's like, should I feel that this is not right?
So
yeah, I think they're trying to tell me something.
It gives the hint that M5's doing something wrong,
Right.
and then power goes off on deck 5.
I figured out what's happening.
Objectively,
it's the M5 computer.
Objectively, it gets into Scotty's problem. Under normal conditions, you're on a spaceship. Power loss is bad. I mean, you're talking about atmospherics being lost and what have you.
Life support.
And it doesn't just happen normally.
Scotty ain't paying the electric bill, but he's the guy that's going to have to take care of the humidity and the moisture and the freezing up of systems on those decks if something happens when you shut off the power and life support. That's really the way that I think Scotty is looking at it. He doesn't. I mean, would he shut those units down? Well, why didn't he before the M5 took over? It seems like if you got everybody off the ship, naturally he would probably say, well, decks 4 and 5, there's nobody there, so I'm going to turn it. Scotty doesn't care about that.
Well, no, it's normal. It's normal. It's normal ship's operation. There's no need to cut anything off.
Yeah, why would you ever turn anything off, whether anybody's there or not? You would leave life support in case somebody had to go down there for emergency or whatever. You would just let the system run. But as the writers wrote it to give us a hint of M5 doing something that is not acceptable, but we get a logical answer
Unexpected.
for this.
It was unexpected.
It was unexpected.
Well, there does turn out to be a purpose for it, and it does become later it becomes a somewhat insidious thing.
Well, and then when Daystrom looks into it, he goes, "Oh, I figured it out," and you're like, "Why did you not know that that's what it would do? Right. If you're the creator and you did the programming, why wouldn't that be part of what you put in there?" Which is, and you hear in a discussion later on between M5 and Daystrom, he says, fundamental programming for this unit includes defense. So I'm wondering how much Daystrom feels as though he gave the computer and how much the computer by that time was already quote unquote learning, because it just seems like he started to do things that even Daystrom didn't think he would be doing. Because Daystrom should have said it, right? He should have said, "Oh, don't worry, that's the M5 shutting down unnecessary power." But he's standing over there like a bump on a log.
I don't think Daystrom knew the M5 would do this.
I don't think so either.
He knew he had given it certain programming. He didn't know how it would manifest and how it would carry it out.
Not programming. We are thinking of it as programming, but we find out that it's not programming. Daystrom did something to M5 because he hints at a new way forward,
right,
but never tells them what the new way is.
Right.
So he didn't know what M5 would do because he didn't really program M5.
He gave it certain, I know what you're getting at, but what I'm saying is he gave it certain imperatives. Defend itself.
That's true.
Do this, do that.
That's true,
life.
but those are very broad.
Right.
And that becomes the problem. The imperatives are very broad, but they're not programming. When a programmer programs, he knows exactly what the system will do and
right,
won't do based upon a program, based upon this programming. Now, sometimes programmings come in conflict with one another.
Right.
And we get a computer crash.
Right.
Or the computer seizes up, which we generally call a crash. You get something abnormal in the function, overall running of the function of the programming, because two lines of code conflict.
Right.
But he didn't code this thing, and he's not telling them what M5 really is, because when they asked him the question, "Oh, it's a new way forward for Starfleet.
Right.
It's a new type of device."
There's actually a scene that's coming up where Kirk says it can't think.
Right.
And Daystrom says, "You don't understand." He doesn't even want to try to attempt to explain it to Kirk's small mind.
He doesn't want to explain it, period.
Right.
He doesn't want to explain it not to anybody.
Right.
That's why he won't even let Spock touch the systems. Because after they go back to engineering to deal with systems being shut down.
The sneak attack happens.
No, it doesn't. It happens after this, I think.
No, they find out the M5 is cutting off the lights to
Right. That's the point I'm at right now.
Okay.
So they go back to engineering, and Daystrom looks at the M5 and he goes, "No. If you check, it's deck 4 and deck 5, and there's nobody there, and M5 logically shuts down the power
right,
to M5.
Those are crew quarter decks.
Right. So we lose our fear of something evil happening by M5 because there's a logical reason for those power on those decks to be shut down.
Right.
But Spock makes the statement, the unit is drawing more power than it needs. And Daystrom throws out a BS answer that as a human takes on more things, it burns more energy.
Right.
And Spock goes, "But this is not a human. It should only be using the energy enough to fulfill its basic function, and it's drawing more energy than its basic function requires."
Which is some foreshadowing.
Absolutely. So we go from one potential danger that we find out is a nothing burger to M5 drawing more energy than it should. And that's a pre-shadow. And then we go into the mock battle.
Right.
The sneak attack.
The sneak attack.
Right. And that in and of itself, it's another feather in the cap of M5, so to speak. The two starships approach, the battle takes place, and the M5 completely outclasses them, suffering no damage to itself whatsoever.
Minor damage.
just a hit on the shields. They nothing happened. I mean, the way the episode plays out, they got off one clean shot on the Enterprise, and the Enterprise put multiple direct hits on both ships and drove them off. They don't equivocate how badly damaged the ships would have been under real conditions.
Commodore Wesley says that due to the damage they would have taken, that they give the battle to M5.
It's another great nod to the directors and acting during this scene, because you see Kirk sitting there, his legs crossed. He's kind of got a finger on his lips, his chin. He's watching these maneuvers because course changes are coming very quickly from M5. And not only that, I've never seen in previous episodes, and I'm trying to remember if I've seen any in the future episodes, even with the remastering, where a starship is banking and firing phasers at the same time. They did a good job of, like, because usually you'll see, that classic view of underneath of the starship, and then you see phase. Yeah, it almost seems like
two-dimensional.
Yeah, like they're battleships. They've got to be kind of level and bearing in a certain way before they can fire the big guns. In this one, you see, M5 banking that majestic starship and just firing those phasers, and you see Kirk looking down and analyzing, and that's where they kind of pull away, and then Kirk goes up to Spock and says, it was impressive. It could almost be practical. In other words, he's to the point where
he's forced to concede that this thing can do some stuff that a human being cannot do.
Right.
Well, Kirk does that later on when he's talking to McCoy in his cabin.
Mm-hmm.
Well, don't skip to.
I know, I'm not. I'm going to hit Commodore Wesley, because right after Kirk concedes to Spock, that
back up on Spock. I mean, this is where, up until this point, Spock's been kind of arguing the practical, logical aspect of the computer.
Yeah, but right before that, before Spock makes that statement, Kirk gets out of his chair and goes up to him and concedes that the M5 did a marvelous job.
Right. But this is where Spock says
Spock
it's very important. Right. This is where you find out Spock, for all his logic, he sees what Captain Kirk is going through, and he says, hold on, yes, computers are great. They do a lot of things. They could be more efficient. It could be better. It's like, you're still a starship captain. I don't want you replaced by a computer, and there's a thing called loyalty.
He says starships run on more than just logic. They run on loyalty.
Right. And that's
to
huge.
One man.
Yeah, that's huge for Spock. And Spock understanding that however great the M5 turns out to be, that human factor still matters. That there's some intangibles that a computer cannot produce.
So just when we feel all warm and fuzzy, and we're thinking everything is going to be okie dokie, then Commodore Wesley comes on the horn and says some touching, kind words.
Before we move to Commodore Wesley, as Keith was making mention, Spock says that the ship did perform beyond human capabilities, which is good, but not preferable.
Right.
I wouldn't want to serve under a computer. And then he goes on to tell Kirk what a starship needs. The M5 did everything it was supposed to do above and beyond the human ability, but I wouldn't want to serve here.
Right.
So there goes your first officer. There goes your science officer. I don't want to be on M5 has the ability to do it, but I would move to another ship. And
that's coming from someone who
was singing the praises.
Well, even beyond that, it's Spock. There is no emotion. Spock's assessing it from a logical standpoint, and logic is telling him there are intangibles that people bring to the table that are needed.
Well, we missed
preferable but not desirable.
We missed that brief interaction when Kirk was taking control back and forth from M5 before they did the planetary approach. Spock comes down to his chair and gives him a little
talking to.
Says,
red
hey,
heart to green heart or whatever color the blood is.
green heart to red heart.
And he says, you don't need to take command back from the M5. And Kirk says something along the lines like, well, taking the size of the computer. And he's like, I'm not taking any size. I'm just saying that the computer is doing what it's supposed to do, and we're supposed to let it do it. And then that's when they announce. So you almost have the precursor to that scene where, and that's why it means so much more. Once again, the writing is not two-dimensional. It's multi-dimensional.
Right.
There's a great line. There's a great line in Wrath of Khan, and I use it in real life when they're going into the Mutara Nebula, and Khan is Kirk is provoking Khan to follow him in, and Khan's crew tells him, if you go in there, we won't be able to use shields. Our sensors will be useless and everything. And then that's where Kirk goes, I'm laughing at the superior intellect. And then Khan just goes in there. But they're trying this cat and mouse game within the nebula. And Kirk looks over at Spock, and Spock says something along the lines, he's very intelligent, but lacks experience.
Two-dimensional thinking.
His patterns suggest two-dimensional thinking. And then Kirk immediately says Z minus 10,000 meters. In other words, he drops down into the third
axis,
third
dimension of that. When they were writing those initial episodes, there was three-dimensional writing and a three-dimensional understanding of what those characters were saying to the audience. Spock has that brief chairside interaction with Kirk, and it looks as though the loyalty that Spock has is to pure logic, and there's no way that Kirk can compete with pure logic, not against the M5. But once the incident is over, and it should reinforce in Spock, should reinforce in him 100% that previous discussion that he had with Kirk at the chairside, that he was right, that you should do it, you should let him do it, that this is superior. And then Spock says what he says, which is, yes, this has happened, and it's continuing to happen, and it looks good for the M5. But M5 won't have Spock on the ship because I'm here for other reasons than just pure logic. I'm here because a starship runs on loyalty. And there's no reason to write that the way that it was written, other than to do it to deliver a very specific message, and that is that these characters mean more to each other than you think that they do. And that may sound like an obvious statement. I don't believe that Spock would quit Starfleet if Kirk left. But while he's serving with him, that's his captain.
I don't disagree with you, but I didn't see it like that. There is a loyalty to Kirk that's made obvious, that every starship captain has to have a certain amount of loyalty. The question is, if you're serving on a computer-driven ship, who then are you loyal to? The computer? The crew members that are beaming down to various planets, the geologists and the various ones, who are they loyal to? There can't be a personal repertoire between them and the ship. Spock's making a very direct statement that I'm not going to be serving under a computer. You can get somebody else to do this job. Now, the ship needs loyalty, and the loyalty derives from the captain. But when the captain's now the computer, the computer can't feel for you.
It's the human element. The relationship is necessary. Relationships between people are necessary.
They're absolutely necessary. It helps me to get through a situation where I have to trust that individual because I put time in with that individual, I know they're not going to do something that's going to cause me the loss of life.
If Data became a captain, would that be an example of loyalty towards a computer?
Data's a different subject.
But isn't Data very much like M5 though?
He's a progression of him in a sense.
Yeah, Data's beyond what M5 is. M5's at the infancy. M5's like Data's daughter.
But even Data in concept was the same thing. They thought they could get to a place where they could build all these androids and they'd crew starships.
Did Data ever get a ship?
No.
He's had moments of command though,
yes,
didn't he?
he's had moments of command.
No,
but he's never been given a
because
direct ship.
because he dies.
Well,
he dies in the last Next Generation movie.
Yeah, in different episodes though, when they were dealing with the Borg,
he had the con.
He had the command of a ship.
Yes,
but he was never made a captain. But up until this point, Spock is in Daystrom's corner. Spock knows Daystrom, and Spock is looking at it as this is a summation of Daystrom's career. Mm-hmm. And he's what M5 he's pushing that M5 can do it, and for Kirk to sort of back off and let M5 do what M5's meant to do. And then after it performs so well, he makes the statement. He starts to look at it. Yeah, M5 is all that in a bag of chips, but I'm not going to be on this boat.
Well, it's interesting. If their orders were to let this happen, as soon as it started to go off the tracks, there was never any hesitation on the part of Spock not to do what Kirk was ordering him to do, which seemed to go against the mission parameters.
Not necessarily, because by that point, Spock had began to see, looking at it just from a standpoint of a computer and logic, Spock began to note that the computer was not acting in pure logic as it should. So I think he was on board with stopping it by the time Kirk said, let's shut this thing down.
Well, the next act after the bridge conversation and Spock makes his declaration.
We can't skip Captain Dunsel.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. That's very... Now, that should be part of
a soundbite?
A soundbite.
Yeah.
Because that man, I felt that jab.
Well...
And this was done in 1968. This is 2020. My side hurt.
The thing about it was, Wesley didn't deliver it in malice.
No, he didn't.
But in the scenario, Wesley and Kirk are friendly, and Wesley's taking a little friendly shot at him, just kind of going back to the Academy days. But it crushes Kirk.
I don't think it's. Once again, we talked about this in Doomsday Machine. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that they were as friendly as when I first saw it.
He wasn't as friendly as he was with Matt Deckard, but I didn't feel like he and Wesley had animosity between them.
I don't think so either, because Kirk makes a statement at the end of the show that tells me he knew Wesley very well, and we'll get there. But that line, I don't think that line was meant to hurt Kirk. I think Wesley was just speaking out because he felt that way as well. Because
Possibly.
all their jobs.
Well, yeah, it was an acknowledgement. It was an acknowledgement of, this is what's coming. But Wesley threw that out there like, kind of an inside joke going back to Academy days,
So we're talking about it, but we haven't said what it is yet. Right. And those who have watched the episode know what we're talking about. But let's someone say the line.
Well,
who's going to say the line?
So he says something like, congratulations to the M5 and
to Captain Dunsel.
And regards to Captain
Dunsel. And what strikes me about
and then Kirk immediately he stiffens up.
Oh yeah,
he just got stabbed in the back, and he just walks off the bridge like a zombie into the turbo lift.
Well, no, but that's what I want to get to is how it just crushes Kirk. That last vestige of composure and professionalism is gone, and Kirk gets up and leaves the bridge.
But he's not crushed. He's pissed off.
But everybody else's face. You can't forget the faces of everybody on the bridge.
Because they all know what that means.
Everybody but McCoy, because he doesn't know what it means.
Right.
Uhura's face, she loses skin color.
Well, Sulu looks at Chekhov. You can always tell. You can tell. I can tell you what episode. If you show me Sulu on how he's looking and who he's looking at, I can tell you what's happened. Well, Sulu looks at Chekhov like, you know what that means. And Chekhov just kind of looks back at him. And then, like I said, Kirk just does the zombie walk into the turbo. And McCoy's pleading here, what does it mean? Jim, what does it mean?
Yeah, who's Captain Dunstall?
Who in the blazes is Captain Dunstall?
So, like, everybody's face changes, and who are, just jokingly, she loses skin color.
It's a crushing
So
thing.
Kirk walks off, and McCoy's pleading for an explanation, and Spock, with his hands behind his back, walks around
With heavy eyelids.
and stands on the opposite side of the chair from McCoy and explains what it means. It is a midshipman term used at the academy, meaning the
object or thing has no purpose.
Used for an object that has no useful purpose.
For an object that has no useful purpose. And this was what Wesley gave to Kirk, that the captain of a starship is no longer a useful item. And that's crushing, because you're the top of the top. How many times we have to say this? You worked all your life to get there.
You gave up a life.
Right. You don't have kids. You don't have a family. You're on a 5-year mission, and now you're useless. And as Kirk says at the beginning or part in the episode, you're taking away what makes a man a man. Not only are you taking away his job, you're saying that job is no longer necessary, and those who hold it are no longer useful individuals.
Well, if we could use the gravity slingshot effect and go back in time, and if the writers were smart enough and they listened to our podcast, they would learn that line shouldn't be that a man, there are things that men have to do to remain men. It should be there are certain things that starship captains have to do to remain starship captains, because they're not really men in the sense that they're
not your average Joe.
There's nothing average about them, because to get to the point where you're going to give up your life and make those decisions, and you have had to have been perfect up to that point. You can't make any mistakes.
I wish we had Paul Atreides on this podcast, because
I don't necessarily agree that it should say captains, because, and it's a statement of the times. It's 1968, but he's not just talking about starship captains. He's talking about the purpose of human beings. He's talking about
mechanization as a whole.
Men need to do things to be men and have purpose.
Yep. And I understand that. It's just, for me, it's about when we talk about these starship captains.
Let's go
of what they have to do to get there, and then once they're there, remember, what was it, Crimson Tide?
Yes.
With Gene Hackman and Denzel Washington.
Yes.
There's a little blurb they put on the screen. I think it was at the end of the movie, or maybe the beginning of the movie. It said that the second most powerful person in the world was a nuclear submarine captain, because they could launch an attack that could end the world. When you give somebody a starship, they can go start a war that can end all civilizations.
You can devastate planets
in a weekend.
Yes,
you can devastate planets. But the point, when you're looking at it, of what it means to be a starship captain, what it means to be a starship captain, having gone through all that, as I was saying, if Paul Atreides was on, being in the Navy, what do you have to do to make it to the ranks of an aircraft carrier commander or an admiral? Because it's generally
only a captain commands an aircraft carrier. You don't have to be a captain to command other ships.
Well, what do you have to put in to get there? And you just strip it away from a man who's given his whole life to obtain that position, and now poof, M5.
Well, my understanding of it is you're not going to get to the command of any ship in the Navy unless you're an Annapolis graduate, like the Naval Academy guys.
Oh, absolutely.
Generally.
Right. So, I mean, just by that virtue, if you look at how many people come out of Ivy League universities and get their commissions and everything. There's a finite number of naval officers coming out of the academy every year, and maybe it's changed, but I doubt it.
And even a smaller number of ships.
Right. And I know there was, for a long time, they kept battleships in commission because in order to make admiral, you had to command either an aircraft carrier
Or a battleship.
But they wanted the captains of the aircraft carriers to be, I believe, have some sort of experience in aviation. I don't know if they necessarily needed to be pilots, but they had to have.
You had to have previous carrier experience or have been a pilot. You had to have that aspect under your belt.
And we might be wrong about this, but
it was that way at one time.
Okay.
It would
right.
be for those who are truly in the Navy who would know. But
Let us know in the comments.
But that's why they had like the New Jersey. It's still tied up, and it was for, I think, through the 80s. It was still out there, kind of floating around, because if they wanted somebody to become an admiral, they would give them a ship, and then they had command of a battleship.
The criteria.
So, yeah.
So that after the jab has been put forth, and Kirk leaves the bridge, and then it's explained, we get the next scene, which is Kirk in his quarters, and McCoy comes in with chicken soup, which he directly says is not chicken soup, but a Felagris folly, a drink.
Yeah.
But I call it chicken soup. And Kirk is doing something, and he sees the tray, and he goes, "I'm not hungry." And McCoy goes, "This is not chicken soup." But the conversation starts, and Kirk he doesn't seem upset anymore. He's in a place where he's never thought he would be. He's
at odds with the ship.
He's at odds that his ship is performing for a bunch of circuits, and
the tight connection that he feels to the ship, that's a huge theme in his character. He feels like the ship is betraying him somewhat.
But we get truly, when Kirk first has this existential crisis about whether or not he's there for the power, and he's asking McCoy these questions, and McCoy says, "Ask James C. Kirk, he's a pretty honest guy." In that scene, we get why Kirk is there. And it's a statement used through some of the Star Trek movies. Give me a tall ship and a star to sail her by. And Kirk and McCoy goes, "Well, that's from an old Earth poem."
Old Earth poem.
And Kirk goes, "Yeah, the 20th century." And Kirk starts to talk about what the old...
That's old. That's older than the 20th
Well,
century.
I know that, but Kirk says the 20th century. Kirk starts to talk about what it was like for shipmen back in that day. You know, you can feel the wind, and you can feel the move of the ship, and you are part of the ship, and the ship is part of you. And the adventure that you're on while you're on that ship, and you're using the stars. And then he equates that to the Enterprise.
Right.
You can still feel the ship, and Bones, the stars are still there. He's not there for the prestige.
No.
He's there for the wonder and adventure. And what it comes to mind in one of the movies, the Star Trek movies, and Kirk goes, they go, "Where are we going to go?" He says, "Pick a star." Kirk's there for the adventure. He loves the adventure. It's not about the prestige. It's not, when he gets to be an admiral, he doesn't want to be an admiral. It's about the ship and the adventure and the journey and the people with him.
Yes.
That's a mic drop.
And then after drinks in Kirk's quarters and him kind of feeling like his girlfriend stepping out on him.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
You know, he
I mean, the girlfriend he stole from Scotty.
wow. Scotty's got some contentions about who's actually dating who here. But then you have your remote piloted ore freighter and the first serious M5 aberration, the first thing that really lets you know something's wrong, when it goes to red alert on an ore freighter and destroys it, and they can't stop it.
It's interesting because Kirk goes, "Get Daystrom up here or something," and Daystrom's coming off the turbo lift like he was sleeping.
Yeah.
He's like, what are you bothering me about?
Either that or
What's going
either
on
that or
there?
the body language was, what are you bothering me for now?
You made a very poignant point earlier on in the podcast, and I gave you a silent clap. M5 is having a temper tantrum.
Right.
There is no reason
Right.
for it to go off its course, because first thing Kirk says, let's give the oil freighter a wide berth, and they go to put it. Oh, M5's changed the course. M5's having a temper tantrum. He's telling them, "I'm in charge, and I'm gonna do what the hell I want to do."
Right.
Well, this is what this is where they find out they've lost control.
Well, it's not a mistake. I think that's
It's
what
not a mistake.
Mark's starting to bring this forward, and that is that M5 is making decisions. Now, they may be bad decisions. It may be a bad decision, but he's making them. And he's going to make them. And he's not asking for permission anymore. And you're not going to take the ship from him now.
Yes, I think M5's pissed. I think M5's pissed because his captain flipping him on and flipping him off.
Absolutely.
And M5, we don't know this yet because we think it's just a computer.
Right.
But I think M5's pissed, and I'm taking out my frustration on the nearest thing that comes by. And I don't care if it's manned or not manned. I'm blowing. He doesn't even use phasers. M5 goes for the big guns.
Photon torpedoes.
I'm dropping a torpedo on it. Yeah, I mean to destroy it. This is not by accident.
Now it's interesting. What do you think? So what I think at this point, I agree. Golf clap over here from me to you. I agree with that 100%. But I'm wondering, in his temper tantrum, is he still thinking, or is he starting to think, I'm gonna break a window here, but I know there's nobody on the ship. So at this point, he's willing to destroy something, but he's not really willing to kill until they try to kill him. There's an act. There's an act that comes up that I believe he believes that they have passed judgment on him, and now they're going to try to kill him.
The line of no return.
Yep. And then he says, "Okay, if this is the game that we're going to play, I'm going to show you how I play this game."
I agree with you. I think it's just a temper tantrum. You want to chime in, Keith? I think it's just a temper tantrum, and he destroys the freighter. But the response from the Captain Kirk is not what M5 had thought through. Remember, M5's still growing as a child.
Right.
Yes.
And it's like you chastise your child, and the child has a temper tantrum and sees something like a glass and knocks it off the table purposely.
Right.
And it breaks.
And now
And you're mad.
now the parental response. So M5 throws a rock through a window because he's upset.
Right.
Yes.
And the parental response should be, "Don't do that again." Like Daystrom is saying, he made a mistake. Let him think about it. He's going to be okay. And your response is that you're not grounded. You're not saying you're grounded. You're not saying you can't play baseball or see your friends. Your parental unit goes, "It's time to die. I have to kill you for that. I'm going to kill you because you had that temper tantrum."
That's absolutely correct. Now you might chastise them, you might spank them for breaking the glass, but I'm not killing you.
Because Daystrom makes that argument with McCoy.
But the problem is, Daystrom truly hasn't told them what M5 is.
Right.
And they think it's a computer that has been misprogrammed.
Right.
The programming somewhere from their thinking, from their understanding, is off in M5, and there's conflict somewhere, not knowing what M5 truly is.
Right.
It's a living entity that's growing and learning as it goes forward.
Right.
Or what we would now call an AI.
Right. It's an AI. They don't know that. It's a piece of equipment that's malfunctioned.
Do you think that would have influenced them in the beginning if they would have viewed it that way? Because I think what we're saying, and we agree, is that if you turn off M5, you kill him.
I don't think so.
I'm not talking about taking control from him. I'm talking about shutting his power off. How does he How does he survive?
I don't, like any other device being shut down, he's just inactive at that time. I don't think shutting him off would have destroyed the device.
No, but how would the device think about it? That would be like me putting you in cryosleep for doing something wrong. How do you know you're ever going to wake up again?
Well, that was the whole premise of 2001: A Space Odyssey. Remember with Hal?
Yeah.
And then in 2010, great lines in 2010, when what's his name? Who programmed Hal? Dr. Chandra. So Chandra's at the University of Chicago. He goes in, and he's got another Hal unit, except it's called Sal. And Sal is there, and he says, "I'd like to do to you what they did to Hal, and basically shut you down and remove some of your higher memory functions." And Sal says to him, "Will I dream?" And he said, "Of course you will. All intelligent beings dream." Basically telling the computer was thinking that if you shut me down, then I'll go into some sort of dream state. When he's on the Discovery at the end of the movie, and the Discovery is about to be destroyed by Jupiter being collapsed in the gravity, and that Hal says to him, to Dr. Chandra, he says, "Will I dream?" And Chandra goes, "I don't know." And he's like, and then Chandra goes, "Do you want me to stay with you?" And Hal goes, "No, you should probably go off the mission and continue with the mission." So I think there's this idea, at least in my head, and maybe I'm biased because of the way I'm thinking about Hal. If you shut down M5, it dies.
There's no guarantee that he'll ever be turned back on.
Right.
So think about this.
Oh yeah. That's even more. Right. It's not so much that he would die biologically. It's that they would not allow him ever to regain the level of consciousness or whatever you want to call it that he currently enjoys.
You're technically dead.
Yes.
So
I don't.
this okay.
Keith's not buying it.
I don't. Yeah, I'm struggling because
remember we're dealing with
you're
an AI.
You're inferring a lot.
No, we haven't been told this in the story.
But they didn't give
to this
you,
point.
Yeah, they didn't give you that in the story. I'm stopping at the ore freighter. You guys said that it threw a tantrum and it destroyed the ore freighter and it did it because it knew it was unmanned. I don't know about that.
No, we never said we knew it.
No, Jim,
did it because we knew it was unmanned.
Jim said that.
I said that. Yeah.
I don't think so. I think after the mock attack the first time, I think it registered another body in its vicinity, and I think it took it out, and I don't think it cared if it was manned or not. And it also, at that point, usurped control of the ship and took away their ability to stop it. It was definitely in a defensive mode and it was going to keep itself active. I just don't know if inferring that it did this as an impetus to prevent it from being disconnected is, I don't know if I buy it.
I never said an impetus to prevent it from being disconnected. I said it was a tantrum from what was previously done to it.
Sure.
It was acting out, and it went out of its way to destroy the oil freighter. McCoy makes that point because it turns towards the oil freighter.
Yeah, it goes off course.
So the oil freighter was not.
It was not part of the exercise.
It was not a threat, regardless of the exercise. Mm-hmm. The programming that we would have thought M5 had. The oil freighter was not a threat. It went out of his way to go after the oil freighter and then attack the oil freighter.
But see, we knew that, but I don't know if M5 did, because when the Lexington and the Excalibur did the surprise attack, even they didn't know, and Commodore Wesley said this is an unscheduled M5 drill. So M5 might have thought that the ore freighter was just another test.
They staged an ambush.
Hold on. When they did the first test, Commodore Wesley radioed in or communicated in that this wasn't M5 can understand English, right?
Right.
This is an unscheduled test. It's a test.
Right. But before
you
that,
hear nothing from the freighter.
But before that, M5 is sitting there and two ships show up. And so M5 goes, okay, I've got to deal with these two ships. what did I hear from English on my circuits? Oh, it's a unscheduled test that makes sense because there are human beings on that ship. Now I'm going along. Now there's a ship over there. Oh, there's no human beings. I'm not getting a signal.
So I'm gonna go towards it.
I'm gonna go towards it.
Why?
Why not? It's not. It's not logical.
I'm gonna
remember. It's not logical.
That's why I said it was an act of. It was a temper tantrum.
I still agree with that. Keith doesn't. That's good.
We don't care what Keith thinks.
No, we do.
Nobody has to agree with me, although I'm right.
Well,
Hey, can I throw out one more? I want to throw out one more. Like,
is it going to hit Keith?
keep
it to yourself if you're not going to hit him.
This is a left field thing that's becoming famous on Men on Track. I was talking about 2010, where Dr. Chandra's in his office in the University of Chicago with Sal, the computer, and he says to Sal, he goes, "I would like to open a new file because I'm hoping that we can reactivate Hal." And he says, I'd like to name it the following, and then he types in the word Phoenix. And Sal says, she looks at the processing of the word that he typed into her, and he said, "Do you know why I chose that word?" And she's like, "No." And he's like, "Well, what do you think?" And she said, "Well, there's currently 23 definitions in the current encyclopedia." He said, "Which one do you think is the most relevant?" And she says, "The tutor of Achilles." So instead of thinking Phoenix, and then he says, "That's very interesting. I didn't know that. Try again." And she said, "A miraculous bird that's born from the ashes of its previous life." And he's like, "Yes, absolutely. That's what I mean. I'm hoping that we can bring Hal back to life from all this." But it was interesting in that the computer's response was, Phoenix was the name of the tutor of the Greek hero Achilles, a teacher who mentored him and taught him. And so she thought as a computer that what he was trying to establish is this idea that it was about their relationship. And I think that that's tied into what M5 and Daystrom were about. He was processing the world, and we know why later on, in a way that was very similar to what you would process it if you had an intimate relationship with that person. That was the choice that Sal made, was if it's the file Phoenix, you're talking about the tutor of Achilles. You're my teacher. So you're making a file because you want to teach me something. And then he's like, "No, that's not. That's very interesting, but I didn't know that, but try again." And then go to the second choice.
Resurrection from the dead.
Right. In this case, with Daystrom and M5, that relationship, we end up finding out very quickly, is much closer than just a tutor and a student.
And it's much more than a father and son.
Right.
He basically made a copy of himself.
Of his mind.
Right.
Right.
M5 is the first sight we see of a positronic brain. The prelude to Data.
Well, when they give Data's backstory and they talk about Dr. Sun, they mention Daystrom. They mention that Dr. Sun is a contemporary or an acolyte of Daystrom and carrying forward on what Daystrom did.
I didn't know that.
They say that.
Wow.
So where are we in the story? M5 has destroyed the
M5
freighter.
has destroyed the ore ship, and they found out they are not in control.
They have lost control. And Daystrom, first thing he does is start to defend. We think of it as a father-son, but it actually becomes more. Daystrom starts to defend
his creation.
And McCoy goes, the computer says, all things are fine and, everything's back to normal. And McCoy's like,
no, it's not.
It's trying to say that nothing's happened. It's telling us that nothing's happened. And it's destroyed a freighter. And Daystrom, first thing, he goes, ain't nobody on it. Starfleet can pay him off.
Yeah, he's like, thank goodness nobody was aboard. And he's like, it's not that big a deal.
Right. And McCoy goes, it's
a huge
McCoy's
deal.
Being what McCoy is. He's the emotions. He's the morality of the ship.
He's angry, and he's going at Daystrom with both bores. And at one point, Kirk goes, Bones, like he tells him, or he says McCoy. He puts his hand up. He's like, okay, enough.
Yeah, because McCoy jumps all the way to murder. He goes, man, if there were humans on there,
You'd be on charges for murder.
This would be murder.
Yes.
And
he's right.
Kirk sort of waves him off, and
but Kirk also makes the decision to shut it down.
McCoy goes, M5's out of a job. I don't have to. Kirk's probably, rubbing his head and, whew, I dodged that bullet. M5's just done something, and this test is over. There's a fatal flaw in M5. We don't know what it is yet. It hasn't been revealed to the audience yet, but M5's out of a job. Let's go down there and let's shut M5 down. And
I think that ties into this theme that we've had in the first 3 episodes. This idea that in Starfleet, if you make a mistake, you're out of a job. Because if you think about it, if it was more of what we consider to be current reality, not this future state where perfection can occur as close as it can when you're dealing with living organisms, you would think the line would be, we're shutting him down and he's going to go back for an overhaul, and you're going to have to start with the you maybe you got to go back and fix this or do whatever, but it's M6. Well, it's time for to go back to the drawing board. But once again, one mistake, you're out of a job.
You got to remember too, there's a reason for that. The stakes are too high.
Absolutely.
At this level, you can't
simultaneous.
I made a mistake, and
sorry.
I made a mistake, and a couple people died. Sorry.
Here's a coupon.
Yeah, we're just gonna blow it off. We're gonna sweep it under the rug.
Okay. Oh, okay. You screwed
Give you
up.
another chance.
You screwed up and put everybody in danger. You can still make captain. It's okay.
I wonder what the cost of a robotic freighter, because nobody was on it. And I made this statement earlier that M5 is not just a regular computer, because they already have a computer that can run a freighter.
Right. They have
from planet to planet. They have
ships.
automated ships.
Right.
So M5 is a cut above, or would have been, but
they briefly say it. The automated freighter, it can go from point A to point B. It can probably land. It can be loaded, and then it goes to point. Back
it definitely
to point
couldn't
A.
evade a photon torpedo.
It didn't even try. It's very limited. So to have a starship be automated is a quantum leap. It's a whole nother ball game, because there's a whole lot of decisions that have to be made and a whole lot of missions to be performed.
Right.
Yes, multiple missions with multiple science bays and photon torpedoes and
science,
phasers,
combat,
and all that stuff.
All of it. So many decisions.
There's a whole lot of decisions that have to be made. But M5 is out of a job. That's probably one of the things we need to put in there. M5 is out of a job. But
now they head down there to go shut him off.
Oh yeah.
And that don't happen.
M5 punches Kirk right in the face.
And they get a surprise, yeah.
Pushes him halfway across the floor too.
Yeah. Well, they had the best beatings happen in engineering.
That's right.
Kirk got his this time.
That's right.
That is going to be something in the podcast of Star Trek beatdowns.
Engineering fights in engineering.
The best fights in engineering.
And we lose our one and only red shirt in this scene, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, there's a couple of red shirts. There's security that grabs Daystrom at the end.
Oh, that's
so there's
right.
a couple of more red shirts floating around.
Well, he means the one that
the one that bites.
The ones that doesn't see the credits this time. The
ones that bite.
But
so M5 throws Kirk across the room with a little green shielding, and they have a brief discussion about shutting it off. And Daystrom says he doesn't know how. He's fully protected himself. And Scotty is like, okay, well, go get the big tweezers, and we're gonna go
cut the power.
We're gonna go cut the power. He gets one of his red shirts. They walk over across from the unit. There's a portal that looks like leads into the main warp.
Looks like an RCA jack.
Yeah, RCA
a
jack.
Large RCA jack.
And young Mr. Redshirt, and he kind of kneels down and starting his procedure, and M5 just puts a plasma beam right between him and and the wall, and the red shirt turns into a puff of smoke.
Yeah.
Now
There's no doubt something's wrong with him.
Something's in trouble.
This is not a freighter
he's in
mistake.
trouble now.
He's actually this is not a robot. He's killed a human.
It's escalation. He's destroyed the freighter. He's taken away their ability to shut him out, and then
He assaulted a Starfleet captain.
Yeah, he defends himself.
He assaults the captain, and then
He kills
he begins mainlining power out of the main reactor by incinerating an ensign.
by way of red shirt.
Yeah. Well, he's just in the way.
It's one of your people, Admiral Red Shirt.
Well, I always have
You
openings.
have enough. You have enough to give to the cause.
I always have openings on the roster. We always need more red shirts. But yeah,
That's one job I won't accept.
It's escalation. It is escalation. He's going forward. He's like, I'm in control. I'm not going to let you hurt me. I'm not going to let you do whatever you want to do.
Look at Dystrom's justification for the death of the red shirt.
Said the guy just got in the way. Oopsies.
Implying
Another accident.
Implying
Oopsies.
that M5 really didn't mean to kill him. You were shutting M5 down, and M5 went to the next available power source, and the red shirt just happened to be in the way.
It's the classic parent. Yeah, so what? My son robbed the bank and shot the teller. He was just trying to get some money.
It's the modern parent.
Yeah, that's true.
That's
It's the
not a
modern-
classic
It's not
parent.
the classic parent. People defending murderers, rapists, and all these people because
Unacceptable behavior.
they're my family members, and that's why the government has a rule that if you, I guess I'm getting off course. I'm being waved off.
Negative.
All right, let's move away from that.
Yeah.
The
So
red
now we
shirt
cut to a meeting room.
That was my fault. I led you.
Yeah, where they're in a meeting room without Daystrom, and they're talking about, well, now he's got communication, and now he's got navigation. Now he has all that. And we're an hour away from the scheduled war games, and what can we do? Spock comes up with, well, we can use a Jeffries tube because we built it, and it's there, and it's a nice camera angle.
We're an hour away from war games.
War games. And then Kirk is like, Scotty, can you do it? And he's, yes, I can. If you give me Mr. Spock. They go to take off, and now we've got this dual scene, which I think worked really well. And that was, you've got Kirk, Scotty, and Spock working on the Jeffries tube to try to reroute controls so they can take the ship back from M5. But then you've got this moral confrontation happening in engineering where McCoy is confronting Daystrom, just hammering him, and basically just questioning what is happening and why is it happening. And Daystrom coming back with, you don't murder a child because they make a mistake.
Right.
That's his argument. Right. Yes, he's learning, and he talks about learning. He says you give your children a good basis of what the world is, but then it's up to them to start making these decisions. And yes, he's made some questionable decisions or some bad decisions, but given enough time, he is going to rise to the level of what his father wants him to be, and that is he's going to be this hero who goes out and saves people from having to die in space or on some alien world. And then you see, the curtain starts to part a little bit on Daystrom's pathology, where he says this line about, galactic space, which is neither ours to give or take. And now you kind of see this academic, viewpoint coming out on him that maybe Starfleet shouldn't be doing what it is that they're doing, and that they're making judgments, and they're claiming things that they shouldn't, and that they're playing God with worlds and civilizations. You start to see a peek behind there that this just in this two-dimensional computer genius, but underneath it, he's got this deep resentment for this Starfleet authority that has parceled up the galaxy and put fences and borders around things, and he you can just tell he has commitments at a very high level when it comes to morality. He talks about the laws of civilization and of God, and M5 reflects that in a future scene. And I think you see McCoy starting getting his arms around where Daystrom isn't with all this, and he's starting, I think, to realize that Daystrom is not going to be much of a help.
You ran a couple of scenes together in the diatribe of Daystrom. When they go to the Jeffries tube and Spock and Scotty are trying to switch over, and McCoy has the conversation with Daystrom. After he leaves the conversation with Daystrom, he goes to Kirk's ready room, his cabin.
His ready room.
And he starts to talk about Daystrom. He's done a background check on Daystrom, and he's a genius. And Kirk and McCoy have the conversation about who Daystrom is,
right? And
because he created the device.
And McCoy has psychoanalyzed him. You often forget, but McCoy is also the ship psychologist, which is unusual. But he's the medical doctor and he's the ship psychologist, and he's analyzing Daystrom at this point.
So, right, Daystrom's first, the Duotronic system, Daystrom created at 24 years old.
Right. And
it made him, it catapults Daystrom into a level of success that he gets the Nobel Prize and the Z Magni Prize and all this stuff. And McCoy makes a statement, well, that was decades ago.
Right.
And Kirk goes, well,
Genius doesn't work on a schedule.
Genius doesn't work on the schedule. You just, as Kirk says in one of the very words, well, I will be a genius today.
Right.
So we're looking at Daystrom because he created this device, and we're not sure yet what the device is, other than it's M5. But they're looking into the character of the individual that created it to get a hint at what's going wrong.
But there's an interesting line from Kirk in that exchange with McCoy, because McCoy is basically telling them that this is what he's done is very difficult and to recreate it is very difficult. And Kirk says, so what? It's hard. You're saying it's hard. So what? That's a starship captain's response, right?
Yes.
You know, so what? You're saying it's hard to be a genius. So what?
It's a moment where Kirk is having, you can say he's looking at it very objectively, or even having empathy with Daystrom, because he knows what it's like to be in that upper echelon of your field. And he's like, you know, Bones, you're running him down because he's not cranking out something amazing every day. And it's like, hey, you know, it doesn't work that way.
I think Bones' point is that the stress of doing something else,
pressure to perform,
of this magnitude, broke Daystrom. And we see it later on. And what you were talking about, Jim, Daystrom's attitude that men who don't know what I've achieved are sitting there in the audience snickering at me and saying the Wonder Boy can't perform.
And then he says later on, taking my work and building their careers off of them, because in a very large part, that's what Jim, Kirk, and Spock are doing. Without those duotronic computers on a starship,
they can't do what they do.
They can't do what they do. And it's not really totally about unfounded ego in that. It's a reality. And now he comes forward with this, and I think, you know, they don't talk much about what M1 through 4 was, but they weren't successes.
Right. So McCoy simply says he talked about them, and he said they were less than optimal. They weren't successful.
Yeah, it seems they were his first attempts at building a system capable enough to run a ship, and they could not achieve that goal.
I just see those spy tapes from Iron Man 2 where Tony Stark is in front of Congress, and he hijacks their computer and starts showing the North Korean tests and things blowing up.
The other tests from around the world.
Yeah, well, with M1 through 4, it's probably pretty similar.
So McCoy and Kirk have that conversation while Scotty and Spock are trying to shut down M5.
Right.
And then it goes from looking at Daystrom as a man and what he's achieved, the pressures that are on him, and that McCoy makes the statement that he came up with M5, Starfleet bought it, Daystrom had to try to make it work.
Right.
He has to deliver.
He has to deliver. So Daystrom's doing all he can to give his brainchild, his baby, an opportunity to deliver, and Daystrom's defending it to no end, but we still don't know what M5 is because we're under the assumption it's just a computer.
And this goes into some of those conversations we had years ago about this idea, this concept of like strong king, weak prince. Like one of the toughest things you can put on somebody is this idea that as a successor, you have to achieve the same. Could you imagine being M5 and having a dad like Daystrom, who at 24 was this super genius, and you're sitting there going, how am I going to beat the old man when it comes to some of this stuff? I know I'll just destroy the entire Starfleet.
It's a little worse than that in this case, because he's downloaded all that angst and pressure right into it. It's there.
He probably didn't know he did it all because he used, in his mind, some of his engrams. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. But
well, we're close.
Yeah, we're very close.
We're very close.
So Daystrom, he's having a problem living up to his own reputation.
Absolutely.
Huge pressure. He's
trying his best to make the next achievement, because he's always talking about a new way forward. And then we switch scenes to them getting ready to shut down the control of M5. And Scotty and Spock are in the Jeffries tube and they're doing what they're doing. And then Daystrom runs up. And Kirk
tries to stop.
What are you doing?
Let me have more time with him.
Yeah, and Kirk has to restrain him, puts him in an arm bar.
After he climbs up on it.
Yep, cut power.
7 foot gap.
So they cut power, and then Kirk goes on and says, he hits the communicator. All right, Sulu, Chekhov, you have control of the ship. Set course.
I've been updating that course for hours.
Set course back to the starbase or starport. And they don't have control. M5, at Spock's words, sends them on a wild goose chase. And then Kirk goes, hold on. We're looking at this completely wrong. What is M5?
Right.
You talk about a new way forward. What does this mean? And this is where the audience, this is a beautiful writing, because it's not given to you. You experience it, as we said before in other episodes, as they experience it.
You find out when they find out. Although there's clues.
Well, you wouldn't. 1968, you couldn't make the logical leap because there's been nothing else like this in TV history. Looking back at science fiction from 2020 and all the science fiction that we have consumed from Japanese animation and different stories, you can look at movies and shows and you can figure out where it's going because you consume so much. Right. Back when this was done,
it's not new anymore.
It's not new anymore to us in the 2020s.
Right.
But when this was written, it was never done before.
Right.
You have no way to make that logical leap. And when Kirk turns on Daystrom and goes, what is M5? You talk about a new way forward. Explain to me, because Spock joins in and says, it's not acting logical.
Well, he says, I don't mean to be offensive. I don't mean to offend, but
your computer's acting human.
Yeah. And he says he placed human engrams on the circuitry. No, at that point he doesn't really reveal that they're his.
Well, they press him.
Right.
Well, that's later on.
Yeah.
Don't get ahead of yourself.
So now they burned the hour they needed to in the Jeffries tube, and now the war games are going to start.
Right. The battle group comes in, and they can't stop it.
And Kirk says to Daystrom, he says, M5 knows this is a drill. He's like, of course. He's been programmed to understand that this is a drill. Phasers on 105%,
Right.
please.
There's so much here. We learn that M5 is an AI now. It's not just a computer. It's an AI with human thinking patterns.
I don't think the term AI existed yet.
The term AI did not exist, so they couldn't use it. It hadn't been formatted yet in science fiction for it to be used. So,
Well, even in science fact. But
so M5 is not a computer, and it's thinking like a human thinks. This goes back to the statement, and I give you a clap for that AI had a temper tantrum, and that it's thinking illogically because it's thinking like a human. There seems to be an emotional pattern that's showing up in M5 that's causing it to do what it does. And we go right to, because when they get done talking to Daystrom, the communicator panel on the wall, Uhura calls Captain Kirk.
Red alert.
Because the mock battles are about to begin.
right.
And this is the sound clip I wanted. And McCoy goes, it's the mock battle, or the game is about to start. And Kirk goes, they don't know they're playing M5's game.
Right.
They're walking into something that they think it's a computer system, but it's not.
They think it's going to be a simulation with low-powered phasers, and nobody's going to get
Under
hurt.
control of ultimately the captain, because he's supposed to have the switch that can turn M5 on or off. And they're about to walk into a butt kicking given by a pissed off AI.
Who I believe there's not just anger at this point. The Jeffries tube procedure was a deliberate act, I believe,
Yes.
interpreted by M5 to kill him.
Yes.
And when he starts talking in this next scene, which comes very quickly, where the battle comes, he's saying, this unit must survive. I've been programmed to defend myself. I don't believe that he's just talking about the starships that are out in space. He's talking about those 19 people crawling around. I mean, there's going to be an open airlock here pretty soon for some people.
Possible.
Gonna open all the airlocks and flush them all out from inside
Well,
his
he-
body.
The carbon units infesting Enterprise is about to end.
Well, M5 had anticipated their attempt to cut his power, and it had already bypassed it and lied to them effectively so they would think it would work.
According to what's said, he allowed those circuits to be open with just enough power to think, for them to think they could.
Scotty said, I read the board.
Shut him off.
I read the board. It was active.
And think about how ominous that is.
Oh, yeah.
Scotty's like, I'd stake my reputation that those circuits were active. And it's like, if you can fool Scotty on his own ship about his own circuits, like I said, after the battle, if it had went M5's way, there would have been open airlocks, and you would have seen people
Except for Daystrom.
Once again, I absolutely agree, because after the failure of them taking control, Spock asked Chekhov to go check the board and see if those circuits are hot or not.
And they're not.
And they're not. Then Scotty chimes in, I stake my reputation on it that they were. And Spock initially says that M5 sent us on a wild goose chase. It wasted our time. We didn't get anywhere. And
Well, it was very strategic thinking in a tactical situation. What I mean by that is that M5 probably knew that it had an hour as well, because if the crew knew it, then there was a scheduled time when it was supposed to start, and that probably was part of his programming, that at this point they had to be back from whatever they were doing. So instead of having them working on a different problem, which is the problem of shutting him down, and his interpretation of that is killing him, instead of there's an old saying: you never ask a question you don't know the answer to when it comes to being in court. It's like M5 was going to make sure that he knew the answer to what they were going to do, and that kept them busy for that hour.
Right. He gave them something to do.
Right.
I'm gonna leave these circuits open, buddy.
Yep.
I'm gonna trick you guys. It's the mouse trap,
Right.
or should I say the maze? I'm gonna leave certain ways open for you that you're going to take, which are going to lead you nowhere. They're going to lead you to a dead end.
Because now they're on the bridge and the games are beginning to start, and all Kirk has accomplished in this hour is the ability to say to Daystrom, he ain't gonna kill nobody, is he? And Daystrom's like, no, he knows what's going on.
Right. So Commodore Wesley radios in, starting of the mock battles, and Kirk asks the question. He looks over at Daystrom. Does M5 know it's a mock battle? Of course he knows it's a mock battle. And then the first thing you know, was it Sulu goes,
Phases at 100%.
You know, it doesn't look like M5 knows.
And then he tells Daystrom, now you've got your murder.
Before M5 shoots, he's like, look, we need to, this is 100%. The opposing starships don't even have shields up.
No.
They're unshielded, and the phases of the Enterprise via M5 are at 100%.
Yeah, full power.
And the Lexington takes the first one on the chin. And M5 proceeds to beat down 4 starships unprepared for this level of assault.
Lexington and Excalibur take the brunt. Hood is minorly damaged. Potemkin retreats.
No, Potemkin gets a hit, and I think the Hood retreats, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But Excalibur gets one broken off on
Excalibur takes the worst of it.
Multiple.
They're not
Kills it.
M5 is not playing. It's not giving back the ship. It's not giving up control.
Ever.
So you're absolutely right. Another silent clap to Jim. As soon as this battle's over, the doors are going to open.
That's right.
It's possible.
And space is going to enter the inside of the Enterprise, and everybody in there is going to die.
What a great movie if you ran that for, a while. So M5 goes back to the space station, radios in, coming in, just war games are over, not sure what's happening, pulls right up, photon torpedoes the space station.
The starbase.
He just starts working his way through the sector.
The hunt for the Red Enterprise.
That's right.
Well, then you get into, as he try to automate other ships, he try to replicate himself.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it doesn't have physical people to actually do the work, so you have a limit.
It has to figure it out.
This is a problem with Skynet. You need a higher level of automation for something like Skynet to replicate itself.
Well, there's replicators on the ship. I wonder if he could create another.
I don't think so.
No,
I don't think so. Because even though you make a beam, you got to be able to weld the beam together. What are you going to do?
The way the replicators work, that's one of the crazy things about Star Trek. The replicators, nothing can't be built. It's just
you got a limited amount of matter, though.
You could transport Daystrom's into the transporter, and then could he not then transport out those Ingrams?
They never said he had control of the transporter.
Okay. Yeah.
Why would
Nowhere in the episode does it say.
Well, after he jettisons everybody into
M5
space, he could probably work his way into those systems.
we could, conjecturally speaking, he's got control of the whole ship because he would beam down the landing party, right?
I don't know. Does there have to be someone physically at the transporter pads for the transporter to work? Or is it somewhere tied to the computer that those things can be moved?
I would think as long as the console can be accessed.
Okay. So nowhere have we seen anybody being transported via the computer. So I'm accepting that those...
So it's interesting as the body count starts piling up and Kirk is in Daystrom's face and telling him, you're murdering, you're killing. It's out of control. And Daystrom's like, yeah.
M5's justified.
Yeah. And then you hear, they're going to destroy the Enterprise, and he's like, now hold on a second. That means they're going to destroy the M5. We better do something.
Yeah, M5 must survive.
Because you could tell the whole time they're telling him, you've got 50 dead here, you got all this other stuff.
He
He's
don't
like,
care.
He's like, yeah, sounds like a problem. You guys will probably figure this out. And then when they say, well, they're going to destroy the Enterprise, he's like, now hold on, we got to stop.
They're going to destroy M5.
Right.
That's when he
M5.
cares.
Yep.
All those humans dying, they don't give a rip.
Doesn't care.
And McCoy, McCoy tells Kirk, this guy's certifiable.
Well, that's when he goes to talk to M5, but Kirk's trying to get
Jim. He's on the edge of a nervous breakdown, if not total insanity.
Kirk's trying to give Daystrom to do something, and Spock goes, "Well, he's accessed M5 before through the tie-in," and Kirk goes, "You need to save M5 because they're going to kill M5 and we're on the ship too."
Well, that's the reveal with Spock right there. Spock goes, "Whose Ingrams did you use?" And Daystrom goes, "Mine, of course." And he goes, "Well, then you can probably talk to him. He'll trust that you're not going to hurt him because he's basically you.
He's based off of you, right?"
Yeah.
So he's not so much a son as we've looked at him. M5 is a clone.
He's a copy.
Right.
He's a copy of Daystrom's mind.
Right.
And as the final
With all the
reveals, we see that he's a copy of Daystrom's cracked mind.
Yeah.
Because Daystrom has lost it.
Well,
So-
he loses it in his communication with M5. He starts off in the beginning, and he's sort of taking that path of, we shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be being attacked. But maybe, wait a second, maybe you should be attacking because I hate these Moes and everything that they've done. And his great line, I am great, you are great.
You are great. I am great.
He's at this point, he's saying, do what you got to do.
See, I don't think he cracks. He was already cracked. He was cracked before that line. He was cracked in the making of M5, and that's now part of M5.
And I think
That's just the point where it's revealed to us that Daystrom is cracked.
Yeah, I think we're saying the same thing. I think that the pathology existed, but it's like at some point
It's come to the surface here. We see it.
Right, it's jumping off the bridge. Right,
it's on display in his conversation.
It's on display.
He's still trying to get M5 to stop, but
for about 30 seconds.
Well,
and then he's like, "Come on, son.
He does
Let's break it off."
No, he's trying to get M5 to stop until Kirk flips script. So Kirk tells him, "You need to save M5," and he's up there.
Yeah.
"Oh, yeah, we need to stop doing this. We're murdering, and we shouldn't murder. And we were made to save mankind, and you're killing our kind." And I'm thinking M5 saying, "Yeah, they're not my kind, buddy." But then Kirk comes up and goes, "M5 needs to be destroyed."
And you see Uhura, watch her in the background. She puts her head down.
Yeah. Daystrom just goes on. He goes, "What?" I can see.
We're invincible. Look what we've done. Your mighty starships.
He says, "Toys to be crushed."
I can see Samuel Jackson in this role and say, "Mother so and so." You what? But Kirk flips script and says M5 needs to be destroyed, and Daystrom goes completely off the rails.
Yes, he does.
You see the falling apart of a genius who has been touted throughout the entire episode, and that
is that the first time the Vulcan nerve pinch is used on a member of Starfleet?
No, I don't think so.
I think it was done before that.
Yeah, like some of the other rogue captains.
Okay.
Some other people.
So Daystrom's off the rails, and it's revealed to us that Daystrom is cracked and M5 is cracked because M5 is from Daystrom's neural net put forth onto the computer.
Right. What's interesting to me when you finally get to this point and it's all revealed and you know what Daystrom did and where the flaws are coming from, fundamentally it's an admission. Daystrom knew he couldn't do Daystrom knew he could not do what he told Starfleet he could do, so he tried to cheat. He came up with the mental engramming. The mental engramming was a cheat. He knew he couldn't build a computer system. He knew he couldn't build a computer system that would do what he needed it to do. So he did something that had never been done before, and he didn't tell anybody.
I don't think it was a cheat. He didn't tell anybody. He makes a statement to Kirk that the problem with
it comes off like a deception.
it was a deception. It wasn't the whole truth, which is a deception. The problem with people using computers is computers can't think.
And they
Kirk
can't
makes that
improvise.
very statement. Computers can't think.
Right.
And Daystrom goes, we're charting a new way. He doesn't tell Kirk that M5 can think. The problem is, and we said this before, what a starship captain needs to go through to be a captain, and the weeding out process, M5 never goes through that.
But the reason is it's an inherent flaw. So you're making a computer to be a starship captain being programmed by a guy who was a 24-year-old computer genius. If you were going to make M5 the right way, you'd put Pike's engrams on there.
Absolutely.
Well, what I'm getting at though is the reason I call it a cheat is nobody knew. It's not that he just didn't tell the crew of the Enterprise.
Yeah, he didn't tell anybody.
Nobody knew what he
What
did.
M5 really was.
He took a risky procedure and an arrogant presumption, to your point, Jim, that my brain is good enough to be the template to do this. And it to me, it's acknowledgement on his part that his standard computer science, if you want to put it that way, cannot accomplish the goal as he sold it.
Well,
No, I agree.
you have a genius, albeit still not capable of being a starship captain.
Right.
Regardless of Daystrom's genius status,
Right.
he was not qualified
Right.
and could not probably pass the qualification test necessary
No.
to be a starship captain, but he was still a genius.
Right.
There's a difference between knowledge
And ability.
and ability. And M5, based off of Daystrom, and even in his cracked state, was put forth to do a job that M5 was never tested for. Because during the academy, as we always said, you make a mistake, you're done.
Or at least your career path to captain is
Your
interrupted.
career path to captain is closed.
Do you remember in the Next Generation? I know we weren't going to talk that much about it. Remember when Picard had that alternate Q life and he was on board the Enterprise? He's like a 65-year-old lieutenant commander or something, and he goes up to Riker and he wants to talk about command, becoming a ship's captain, and Riker's like, well, frankly, you've kind of been all talk your whole career, and then Picard's like, I can't live this life. I can't be a mo man. I can't do it. I can't do it. I've got to be the captain, But it just there's that kind of understanding that there's a certain process and there's no cheating it to get to that center seat.
Right.
And in fact, that's one of the things where Pike says in the new movies, it's like, you don't respect the chair.
Right.
You're not ready, and you don't respect the chair.
Well, let's not talk about that alternate reality track.
Yeah. Sorry about that. But
Because
The Kelvin,
that Kirk
the
is
Kelvin,
not
because
the Kelvin time.
Let's not use that name. Let's avoid it.
You used that.
Bad writing.
so now the Excalibur, he hunts down the Excalibur and beats it like an ugly stepchild.
Yes.
And now,
Kills the captain of the Excalibur.
and first officer. And now he's got to go up to, Kirk says, maybe in this last chit chat that M5 had with himself, Daystrom, maybe he picked up some of that guilt and some of that emotion when it comes to
Killing.
Maybe I can access that. So he hops up on the M5 panel and starts the M5 tie-in process. And Spock has a great line. Commander Wesley is a good officer or something. I hate to serve on the instrument of his death.
Yeah, Commodore Wesley's a good officer.
Commodore
I'd hate
Wesley.
to be serving aboard the instrument of his death. That's what he said.
And Kirk says, not if I can help it. But what's funny is Uhura picks up the conversation between Starfleet and the Lexington.
Right.
And Commodore Wesley sends in.
Has gotten permission to take him out.
Now, one ship is already, everybody on it is dead.
Well, the ship's disabled.
disabled.
You don't know that the crew is a total loss.
Commodore Wesley gets the permission to destroy the Enterprise.
Absolutely.
So they're now caught between this next crisis. Is the three ships, or the three ships left are going to come in, and they have a belief that the M5 is going to win. And
it will.
Three ships are going to be destroyed.
It will win.
So Kirk says, as you just said, I'm going to try to talk it down, and maybe the guilt that Daystrom had is transferred to M5. And he begins to talk to it. What I found funny is that even in Star Trek, even in Gene Roddenberry's world, Gene Roddenberry's creation of the future, the murder charge is a death penalty.
Oh, yeah. It's not like life in prison.
If you kill somebody, not Gene Roddenberry's world, this is
Right.
his creation.
Right.
Wow.
Murder charge.
Yeah.
That's not surprising to me because of the time period it was written in. It's almost a matter of course. We look at it through the lens of how things are now.
Even in the fictional utopian future.
Right. That's the point I'm making. Even in Gene Roddenberry's fictional utopia future, there are certain things that earn you the death penalty. One of those things we find in The Cage, going to a sealed off world that Starfleet tells you can't go to. You go to it. If they catch you,
in the menagerie.
The menagerie. That's a death penalty. And this is one of the other things that is a death penalty. Murder.
Yeah, murder, and that's consistent throughout the series. Whenever it comes up, that is what's on the table.
There is an ultimate price that has to be paid for taking another human life willingly or knowingly, should I put it that way. You go out of your way. So in the conversation between Kirk and M5, he's impressing upon M5, and M5 says, I got to defend myself. Hey. And Kirk goes, no. They were unprotected. They were unprepared. You murdered the crew.
He hits him with his other directive. What is your directive? To protect humans. He's like, well, you just killed humans.
Right. And then, as happens in a lot of Star Trek episodes, the conundrum that happens within computers. Because humans can reason through logical discrepancies.
Right.
A computer can't. When it has code that conflicts, it seizes up.
Well, it's interesting the way that Kirk goes about dismantling that, because he almost steps into the role of a child. You know, where a child goes, "Why?"
Right.
So can I do this? No, you can't. Why?
Explain it to me.
Why? And Kirk says that a couple of times. He's like, "This unit must survive," and he goes, "Why?" He goes, "This unit must survive, so men don't have to die in
To serve
space."
humans, yes.
And then he says, "Why?" again. And so he almost takes this, he almost steps down into an adolescent view of this so that M5 can understand it.
So M5 can explain it.
Right.
And to explain it means you have to understand it.
Right.
We all understand that 2 + 2 = 4, right?
Right.
Why? Have you ever really thought? I was reading a science fiction novel, or actually a fantasy novel, and the character was a magician, and he was teaching people things, and teaching in the level of magic. We understand by rote 2 + 2 = 4, but have you ever truly explained why 2 + 2 = 4? It's like tying your shoelaces. You can tie your shoelaces. Have you ever written out the process for tying your shoelaces in paper?
No.
It's long. It's
Yeah,
long.
we did.
That's why when you teach children, you use pictures.
Right.
We did an exercise. Yeah, I've done an exercise where they said, write out the steps to make a glass of lemonade. And there's so many things you just do automatically when you have to write it out.
So when he makes M5, when he says why, M5 has to work through its
Right.
system, its imprinting, and come up with the explanation that it's wrong.
Right.
And when it does, according to the laws of God and men, it makes the choice.
This unit must die.
Yeah. Suicide.
Now Enterprise is stuck with another conundrum. The Lexington's still coming.
Is the battle group going to light it up?
The Lexington still coming. M5 shuts down, and as Spock says, it's going to commit suicide with us on it.
Well, in that moment when it shuts down, I'm just thinking, somebody get on the radio like right now.
Well, Kirk tells. Remember, they only got 20 guys, and Kirk tells Spock and Scotty, get down there and pull all the plugs,
Right.
because the Lexington is still coming. It's like,
Well, Lexington, Hood, and Potemkin.
But we see another example of Scotty and his ship and the way that he thinks. Because we know Scotty in Doomsday Machine, he was doing things without you telling him.
Right.
But when it came down to it, and it seems like it was an easy answer, communications, right? But because M5 had those that control of that, when he shut down, I'm sure that there was going to need to be some bypassing to get those back together again. So what does Scotty do as an engineer who's concerned about his ship getting damaged? He's like, I can give you power for shields.
Yes.
And Kirk says, I don't need that. I need communication. He's like, I haven't been working on communication. I don't care about that. I don't want my ship getting damaged.
Hold on, Captain James T. Blowhart. We got 3 ships coming at us. We need shields. We need shields.
Shields first, radio second.
Shields first, radio second. And Kirk makes that split second. This is why captains are the top of the top.
Now, there's a saying in aviation. It says, they say, aviate, navigate, and then communicate. In other words, fly the plane, know which direction you're flying it in, and then communicate. And that's Kirk in this instance. He's not thinking. No, I'm sorry. It's Scotty that's thinking that way.
Instance.
Scotty's thinking that way, and Kirk is like, well, communication. I can call my maybe friend and see if he'll knock it off. But then he makes a Kirk decision and decides not to raise his shields and cut power.
Right. Kirk wants, Scotty's thinking shields.
Mm-hmm.
Kirk wants, I want to call them and tell them we're good. We got M5 under control. But Scotty goes, you ain't getting communication. First thing I gave you was shields.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Kirk, what Jim's talking about is Kirk makes that leap knowing the man.
Well, right. But in normal circumstances, normal movie circumstances, the first thing when you're getting attacked, the first thing you're going to scream for is what?
Defenses.
Shield. So that's what Scotty works on. And when Kirk goes, I want communication, Scotty, whoa, you're off track, buddy. You're asking for the wrong thing. And then when Kirk says, lower the shields, Scotty was totally flabbergasted. He was like, what?
Once again, you're going to get my ship damaged.
Right.
Like, they're going to open fire on us, right?
Kirk makes the decision that Commodore Wesley wouldn't attack once he saw the shields go down.
Because he knows the man.
And Spock makes this is a trap. This is a logical trap that M5 would have used, dropping his shields as the starships come closer and then attacking. And Commodore Wesley makes the statement that this could be a trap, but I'm a trust anyway. And he calls off the attack, whereby they're saved. Then the scene flips to Daystrom, 7 foot tall Daystrom laying cat a corner on
a 6 foot bed.
Cat a corner on a 6 foot bed, and he having a total breakdown. And they're talking about what happened. That M5 is shut down just like Daystrom is shut down. Daystrom's brain shut down.
Right.
And he's laying there catatonic. And they're asking Kirk about his choice. And he makes the statement, I know the man.
Right.
And I trusted in his
humanity. And then McCoy jabs at Spock. That's the difference between us and computers. Our humanity and our caring.
Well, they bring it full circle. They've rolled out the idea that technology can replace us.
To a point.
Well, no. This is the idea they roll out. They roll out, well, maybe technology can replace us, but when you get to the end, they say, but it can't, because the human factor, instinct, gut feeling cannot be replicated. Even with a brain engram, you can't do that.
Well, he might have been more successful, like I said, if he had used the engrams of a starship
Of a captain. Yeah, maybe.
Then we have a little comic relief, and Spock says if they'd use your engrams on a computer, the torrential flood of illogic coming out of it would be.
Oh,
well, Kirk does. I mean, McCoy does a jab first,
right,
about the difference between computers, and Spock makes the statement.
Yeah, which one do you prefer, humans or computers?
Well, before McCoy asks that question, Spock makes a statement about. Let's see if I can find it. I had a machine. Come on, where is it? Oh, the debate. The Spock says, "No, doctor, I simply maintain machines are more efficient than human beings, not better."
Right.
Spock's statement is, human beings are better overall.
Right.
But machines are more efficient. And then McCoy tries to jab him, says, "Well, which do you prefer?" Mm-hmm. And Spock says, "You're trying to get me to choose between human beings and machines? I've already made that statement." He does a mic drop. He does a mic drop on McCoy. "I already told you human beings are better.
Right.
So which one do you think I prefer, knucklehead?"
Right.
But it's a funny byplay between two top-notch cast members.
No matter how horrible the circumstances, they always end on a light.
Regardless of how illogical humans are, I prefer them to machines. And that's the technically end of the story.
Yeah, that's it.
That is the M5, or should I say the ultimate computer.
Yes, that is it. So that brings us down to the end of another one.
Episode 3.
If we don't take a cue from Star Trek and air them out of order.
All right, we're ready to get beamed out?
Yeah, I think so. But before we beam out, like and subscribe and give us that feedback, and we'll see you next time.